Meeting of the Los Angeles City Health Commission. We are coming to you from Holman United Methodist Church, and we'd like to thank Holman for hosting us in our first meeting that is out in the community. I'm Susie, Shannon, president of the commission, and if the clerk could call the roll, please.
Andres Taylor.
Here.
Ariola.
Here.
Avila.
Here.
Esparza.
Here.
Griffith. Here. Hisrich.
Here.
Hawkes.
Here.
Jimenez.
Here.
Mandel.
Here.
Shannon.
Here.
Sharp.
Present.
Vic.
Here.
12 members present and a quorum.
Great, thank you. Now, if we can move to the approval of the minutes, do we have a motion on the floor?
So moved.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
I had a question. What if you, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Do you have a change?
I do. Actually, I had a point of privilege, point of information on this. I just want to be reflective of the minutes, and maybe we should bring this up at a different time. I'm not quite sure. But items under 3, the motion that we had introduced and passed regarding the discussion to address the current vacancies and leadership roles is on there. However, it's not reflected in the same context on the agenda. So I'm not sure if we bring this up now or at a later time.
Are the minutes accurate?
Yes, minutes are
Then
accurate.
I think we adopt the minutes.
Okay.
Would be my
And then we address the issue of the agenda.
Okay, all in favor of adopting the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay. All opposed? Great, ayes have it. Okay, we'll move on to item number 1. I'd like to take the presentations out of order, if that's okay with the commissioners. We have a presentation and action on health and safety impacts related to petroleum and natural gas, as initiated through a motion from the council from April 15th, which was moved by Weston and seconded by Rue and Englander, with council file 15-0387-S1. Over the weekend, I was able to visit 4 of the oil drilling sites here in Los Angeles, thanks to the Liberty Hill Association Foundation. And I'm really excited that we have 2 presentations and members of the community who would like to speak on this issue. So I'd like to bring forward right now Richard Parks, who is president of Redeemer Community Partnership, speaking on the Jefferson Boulevard oil drilling site.
Thank you, Susie, and members of the commission. Welcome to historic West Adams here in South LA. I've been a resident here for over 30 years and live just a couple blocks with my family from where we are today. Again, Susie, thank you for the invitation to come and share with you about how neighborhood oil and gas extraction has been impacting our community. Just to give you some context, I would start with a map here. What you're seeing, I know it's kind of a lot of detail there, but you'll see there's kind of 2 main points. These are 2 oil fields. This is the Murphy drill site, which is just down the street. We're about right here, where that green dot is, at Holman United Methodist Church. So just down the street is the Murphy drill site, which is connected underground to the Jefferson drill site, just probably like a half a mile, 3/4 of a mile away. It's also connected to the 4th Avenue drill site, which is not pictured on the map here. So as you can see, under each of these drill sites, there's a web of wells that just spiral out underneath the community. Just from really end to end. So what's happened is, this neighborhood was built at the turn of the last century. And in the mid-'60s, Union Oil and other companies began to acquire and demolish parcels to put together to create drill sites, pads for drilling these wells. And so, I think it's important to know that a very dense urban community predates the existence of the oil and drill sites. Well, what's happened is that the easy hydrocarbons, the easy oil and gas, have been extracted at this point. And so to get at the hydrocarbons that remain, the oil companies are having to use ever more extreme extraction methods. What works in the geology under this community is a process called acidization. Acidization is it's a sister of fracking, just many times more toxic. I want to show you some pictures of what acidization looks like in our community. This, that's right, I'm going to have to do this by hand here. So what happens is that these tanker trucks, each holding 5,000 gallons of toxic acid, pull onto the drill site less than 10 feet from the homes. So you can see these are bedroom windows right along here. And here, each of these tanker trucks holds 5,000 gallons. The acid will contain hydrofluoric acid, hydrochloric acid, air toxins, carcinogens, endocrine disruptors. These are chemicals that disrupt reproductive health across generations. And on one side of the wall, we have workers in head-to-toe protective gear standing behind red danger tape. This is that same photo right there. But meanwhile, on the other side of the wall, residents have no notification that these jobs are going to be happening. So a couple years ago, Freeport was asking for permission to drill 3 new wells in our neighborhood, and they had failed to provide public notification. So as we went door to door asking neighbors about how the drill site was impacting them, we were really appalled by the stories that we heard. The family that lived in this home right here shared with us how closed windows could not keep out the smells of petroleum and diesel fumes from the operations on the other side of the wall. And really, eventually, for fear of their 2-year-old daughter's health, they were forced to move out of the neighborhood. This home has also been sprayed with oil from this drill site on several times. The street just in front of these trucks here is Budlong Avenue. Cars on the street have been sprayed with oil at different times as well, too. So it's just really intense impacts. When there are operations on the site, they are absolutely deafening. They'll be driving thousands of feet of metal tubing into the ground. Really, this drill site has just robbed residents of the peaceful enjoyment of their home. But turned out, what I just showed you, the 2 tanker trucks, actually turned out to be a rather small acid job. This is one that happened in November of 2014. It actually involved 4 tanker trucks carrying 20,000 gallons, again, of this toxic brew. And again, you can see just looking straight down the wall, the proximity, again, to the bedroom windows here on the Van Buren side, the bedroom windows on Budlong. Here's a picture showing you the 4 tanker trucks on the site. On this particular job, you may know that there's two types of oil wells. There's a production well through which the hydrocarbons are extracted, and there's an injection well, and the oil company will often use the injection well to inject water to flood the hydrocarbons toward the production well. These 2 types of wells are interchangeable. In fact, the oil companies regularly interchange them. But the rules are that when you acidize a production well, you have to provide public notice via a 54-character web page on AQMD. So basically, if you type in the 54 characters, you can find out whether or not tomorrow there will be an acid job somewhere in your neighborhood. But if the oil company is going to acidize a well that they're calling an injection well today, there is no notification required at all. And so, in fact, this was because they were acidizing an injection well, there was no notice. The trucks just rolled up. Families had no opportunity to close windows, to get their children out of harm's way. And this is just perfectly legal. This is normal oil operations. The fumes from this particular acid job were so intense on the downwind corner that the acid completely burned the plants and scarred the palm tree here. So it's very clear if that's what this acid is doing to the trees and the plants in our neighborhood, it's very clear what it's doing to our children. But that's not the only threat that these fence-line communities face. Other chemicals are regularly brought onto the drill site. And so I took this photo just actually a few weeks ago here down the street in front of the Murphy drill site. I followed this flatbed truck from the Jefferson drill site to the Murphy drill site, and the driver parked across the sidewalks here, and fortunately for an extended period of time. It gave me an opportunity to get out of my car and to walk up and to begin to photograph the labels on these canisters that you see here, these large drums. This was one of the labels right here, and I've blown up the text so you can see it, but it's taken from right here in the label. Danger, harmful if inhaled, suspected of damaging fertility or the unborn child. That's indicative of an endocrine disruptor. These are the chemicals I mentioned earlier that disrupt reproductive health across generations. Just a couple of weeks ago at the Jefferson drill site, we spotted this drum here spraying, you can see, spraying a chemical just up into the air. There's a series of sprayers all around. When we zoomed in, it doesn't show very well here, but I tried to blow it up on the corner here. When we zoomed in on the label, what we found is that it was Chemco Odor Control Jasmine. We secured the material safety data sheets for odor control Jasmine and found that it contains an endocrine disruptor. It masks, doesn't eliminate, it masks hydrogen sulfide gas, which is very explosive, very dangerous, and has kind of a foul odor of eggs. So the oil company is spraying endocrine disruptors on the drill site in the middle of a residential neighborhood to mask other dangers, not eliminate them. This is a photo taken from last summer. We had over 100 children from Holman United Methodist Church, from the tutoring program that we run just down the street, really sending a message both to the city of Los Angeles and to the oil company that we are not your canaries, and that families are tired of being treated like canaries in the coal mine. There are just tremendous health and safety impacts of these operations, and what's become abundantly clear is that oil and gas extraction is fundamentally incompatible with a densely populated urban neighborhood. It is a land use that we need to bring to a close. We no longer have dairy farms in the city of Los Angeles. There's a reason for that. We've phased it out, and there is an urgent need to phase out oil and gas extraction. The other thing I want to mention in closing is that as we have looked into the drill sites, what's been very disturbing and very clear is that the city has treated different communities differently. The city has a disparate set of policies for these drill sites. So the drill sites that are located in West Los Angeles are all enclosed. They all have conditions requiring the use of electric workover rigs. They all have monitoring that's going on. None of those same protections have been afforded to our community in South LA. When you go back and you read the planning documents, it's very interesting. The planners at the time and since often refer to those neighborhoods as quote-unquote quality neighborhoods. But that same language has not been used for our community. You know, it's interesting, I had a meeting with the oil company representative, and it's a very awkward meeting, but I'll tell you, the first thing, we sat down, he said, "Hello, can I call you Richard?" I was like, "Sure, you can call me Richard." He said, "Let's face it, Richard, we're not talking about the Ritz-Carlton at Laguna Niguel here now, are we?" There's been this sense that because this is South LA, they're entitled to run their business kind of any way they want with a reckless regard for residents. Again, it's just, this is a land use that is fundamentally incompatible, and we need to bring it to an end. Now, the other piece of this, of course, is the pipelines. All of the oil and gas that's produced at the Jefferson drill site is piped over to the Murphy drill site just down the road here. And so I want to introduce my friend Angela Johnson-Mazzaros, who's a staff attorney with Earth Justice, and she would like to talk a little bit about the pipelines under the city.
like off of Pico on the west side.
Good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk with you briefly today about oil drilling in Los Angeles and the pipelines that support that drilling. Because I know my time is short, I'm going to give you the highest of overviews of how the pipeline system works here in the city of Los Angeles and some thoughts that I have about whether or not the city of Los Angeles is positioned well to offer the franchises that it does to the not only oil pipelines but natural gas pipelines and other things that go underneath our city through our community and are visiting a range of real and possible harms that the city, it appears, has not devoted the resources and attention to making sure don't negatively impact our residents. So as I say here, our residents deserve better. So I don't think I'm saying anything that's controversial when I say that air pollution impacts health. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about that. I also don't think that I'm saying anything controversial or unexpected when I say that stress impacts health. And these are two things that come together when we're talking about, when we think about how pipelines impact our communities. So all I want you to take from this picture is just Los Angeles has a very dense array of pipes under it. It's because we historically have moved lots of product, oil product, natural gas product, because of our massive oil fields. And so we, unlike many places in the state, have a large concentration of pipelines here. And I think we all know that many of those pipelines end up going to our refineries that are south of here. In Wilmington, in Carson, there are the oil fields here. So the oil field, the Jefferson Drill site that Richard just talked to you about, has pipelines that connected to the Murphy site. Those pipelines end up coming together and moving this product down to the refineries, as is true for oil that's moving from other places in the country and other places in the state. And so this chart is just showing you that nationally, this is the number of incidents that were reported for all types of pipelines, natural gas and crude oil and a few other products, but these are for those kinds of products. And you can see the scale there is about 700 incidents reported in 2015. When we look at California, we're looking at, in 2015, somewhere around 50 incidents, just when you think about what happened in California. And I don't have the data that drills down to Los Angeles County, so I'm going to just focus for a minute on California because I think it sets the context for these broader issues. So this chart is showing us 2014. I'm using that year because I'm going to talk a little bit about the Fire Marshal's report in a few minutes. So I'm using 2014 as this year to peg, just to talk about the way these issues look. So this chart is showing us all the different reasons why in California our pipelines have failed. Corrosion, excavation damage, incorrect operation, material failure, natural force damage, and other outside force damage. And so I wanted to bring this up because when you talk to the oil and gas pipeline folks, what they will often tell you is that the biggest cause of pipeline failure is someone bumping something into their pipeline, somebody digging something and crashing into a pipeline and causing it to explode or leak or whatever it does. And I just want to make this point that while that does happen, and we spend a lot of resources on 811 and dial before you dig and lots of different things where we have public education around how not to damage a pipeline, I just want to note that most of the ruptures, most of the incidents are not caused by that kind of damage. That kind of, the damage that you see, the releases that occur are being caused by these other factors, corrosion, incorrect operation, and the like. And in fact, here, when we look in California and we look at this, oh, yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time seeing this slide, but what percentage on that other slide was physical damage from somebody breaking a pipe?
It's the evacuation damage. It's there in orange, and so it's 20%.
Okay.
So
So 80% is not.
80% is not, exactly. These are the number of incidents that caused fatalities in California, and we have some years that are nice and nobody dies from an explosion, and some years that are not so nice and results in fatalities. And so we can talk about, for example, what happened in San Bruno, right, which was a natural gas pipeline that exploded in 2010, killing 8 people, 8 families, and 8 funerals for this explosion. And I think it's pretty clear and obvious what the impact is on communities when you're talking about an explosion that just burns up your house and your neighbors' homes. So this is a picture of the San Bruno explosion and the destruction that it caused in terms of residential parcels. It was significant. But then I want to drill down because we're talking here about oil. And so we don't have those kinds of fantastic things that happen with oil. The oil pipelines are not likely to explode in a fireball. But that doesn't mean that they don't have real and significant impacts. So this is just looking at the incidents in California with hazardous liquids, which is how they classify crude oils. And so you can see we're somewhere around 30 incidents in 2015. And again, when you look at California and crude oil and the incidents that happened, what we see here is corrosion, incorrect operation, and material weld failure. Nobody bumping their bulldozer into a pipe that's underground. So to talk about this next little piece, I'm going to point you to the report of the California State Fire Marshal. And this is the PowerPoint presentation that he did at a conference. And since we have the internet and we have Google, I have now his presentation. And I'm going to share just a tiny little piece of it with you. So here's what he told us, even though none of us were there, but as he lived on in Google. There's a division chief, there's 2 supervising engineers, and there's 3 pipeline safety engineers with 7 vacancies. These are the people who are charged with the day-to-day oversight of the oil pipelines and all the other pipelines. They've got 4,500 miles of intrastate pipeline to oversee. And what we know about oil is that when you have an issue with oil, it appears on the ground like this. It appears as a large oil slick here. And in this particular site, this is in Santa Barbara, and this ultimately was 100,000 gallons of oil that wasted. And the owner, as it says in the headlines from the LA Times, had this history of these things happening. But we were very comforted because the owner of this pipe says that they deeply regret that this unfortunate incident occurred. And we are very sorry for the resulting impact to the environment and wildlife, as well as for the disruption that was caused to residents and visitors. Right after that, the reporter helps us to put this in a little bit of context with a consultant. For 40 years, I've been investigating pipelines, and I haven't seen one that wasn't preventable. This is part of a larger set of issues around our capacity to adequately staff our agencies to ensure that there is adequate oversight for things that have real and significant harm. So taking us back to the State Fire Marshal's PowerPoint presentation, what he told us was in 2014 there were 28 hazardous liquid pipeline accidents in California. That was up 53% from 2013. And I'll note again, none of those are bulldozers crashing into pipelines. So he also told us that in 2014, they issued 3 civil penalties for a total of $400,000. And he also told us, maybe I didn't put that slide in there, maybe it's next. He also told us that was that felt significant because that was an increase over what they had done in the past. He outlined these 3 significant incidents, and I'll just note that I believe all 3 of these are in Los Angeles. Certainly the first one, which they called a pump station release in Los Angeles suburbs, that was Atwater Village. The Phillips 66 incident that they note next was in Wilmington. And the Kim oil that they note, I couldn't find where that was, but I believe that's in Long Beach, but that was an on-site spill. But as you can see, we've got $3 million in costs, $400,000 in costs, $200,000 in costs. All of them are because of corrosion, a cap failure, and operator error. The fire marshal even included this picture of Wilmington and the oil in the street as they try to clean up the street, and he noted for us that it was a subject of congressional hearing. It made Janice Hahn very unhappy.
It was interesting on that previous one that they pointed out that it was a low-income residential area.
Exactly. So it was a minor
Don't worry
crude
about
spill in a residential low-income area. But it did generate great interest in the U.S. Congress, right? And they fined him $78,000. So I'm glad he's there for us. And of course, you know, here the Kim Oil has their problem, and the way that they dealt with that was it was operator error, so they fired the employee because certainly that's what went wrong there. Undoubtedly, there was some employee that had something to do with it, but one has to wonder what the culture is that allows 989 barrels of oil to spill. So I'm going to bring us home by talking about how this looks in Los Angeles and just talk a little bit about these incidents that the fire marshal noted for us. So Phillips 66, that was a 1,200-gallon spill. At first, Phillips said they didn't do it, but then they acknowledged, yeah, well, they did do it. But they thought that the pipeline was empty, but it wasn't really. Again, this is an issue about oversight, adequate oversight on things that are important. And I don't know about how you all run your lives, but I can tell you on things that are important to me, I make sure I pay attention to what's happening with them. So as Janice Hahn said, I'm wondering, where's the oversight to make sure these pipes are being regularly inspected, and what happens when weak spot or corrosion? Who's responsible for seeing that they're repaired? Well, the fire marshal is. We already looked at his numbers. He's responsible for the entire state. And because the city of Los Angeles issues leases to allow these things to exist under our streets, I would argue that the city of Los Angeles also is responsible for it. And then they talked about this noxious odor. The same thing happened in Atwater Village. 10,000 gallons of crude spewed into the street. They had a pipeline shutoff system, which was good, but it took about 45 minutes for the oil to stop flowing. And if you read the whole article, what you would see is people were crowing about how awesome the response was, that they were able to get right there, get right on it. But still, in the best case scenario, that's a 45-minute break. And they hear talk again about this extreme odor. And the health department said that people who are sensitive to smell, including children, the elderly, and people with chronic disease, should limit their time outdoors as long as the odor persists. So smell they're using here as a euphemism for exposure to chemicals, because smells don't just happen on their own. And what we know is that the chemicals that are commonly found in crude oil, this is from the CDC, the chemicals that are commonly found in crude oil often have smells associated with them, and they often cause a range of problems. Richard already talked a little bit about endocrine disruptors. There's benzene, there's hydrochloric acid. I could go through the list, but the point here is that chemicals in oil have smell, and we can smell the smell, and we can talk about it as if, ooh, plug your nose because it's unpleasant, but actually what that's telling us is that someone's being exposed to something that's likely to be unhealthy. And you all know, because you sit on the Health Commission, that we do not have a system here in the city of Los Angeles, nay, in the state or in the country, that allows us to identify if there was a woman who was living in a house in Wilmington when that crude oil leaked into the road, and she smelled those odors, and she was in her 7th month, 8th month of pregnancy, we don't have a way to know that the problems that her daughter experienced later were not caused by that. We just don't know. It's not actually correct or proper to argue that these things are safe because they happen rarely and we don't have any evidence of health harm. We have a system that is set up so that we cannot track those health harms. We can't track them across the population. We can't track them across time. So ADSTR agrees with me. I'll just leave it at that. I just want to note that the City of Los Angeles has a commission whose job it is to look at these things. The pipeline people are in the Department of Transportation in the Division of Taxi Cabs, Vehicles for Hire, and Pipelines. Those are the people that are responsible for overseeing this. And so they oversee the oil and gas products, they oversee natural gas pipelines. It's a strange thing. I don't know anything about city government, but it struck me as odd. So I'm raising that for you all. And I will just tell you, and I'm really almost done here, that January 15th of this year, we were interested in pipelines and what we were doing to track pipelines and how we were being sure in the city of Los Angeles, because we issue franchises that exist for 10 years, how are we being sure that these pipelines were safe when it came time to renew a franchise, for example? We sent a Public Records Act request to the Department of Transportation, the taxi cab folks, and we asked for the reports that they're supposed to be getting that gives the city the confidence to know that the things are safe. And what they told us was, if you wanted these documents, we just asked the fire marshal to send them over to them. The City of Los Angeles does not even collect the reports that they indicate they would want you to take and have in order to see whether or not your pipeline is causing a problem. If you went to the City of Los Angeles, I don't know everything that happens at the City of Los Angeles, but given my experience with this Public Records Act request, which this is the final take-home after much conversation, I would be surprised if there was anybody there who would be able to tell you whether there are individual pipelines that were being inspected or not, or even tell you whose job it is to make sure that the thing is happening. And saying that the fire marshal is doing it when we just looked at the numbers and there's like a handful of those guys for the whole state is not an adequate answer to my mind. So I started this presentation by saying our residents deserve better. And what I will close by saying is they do deserve better. And if the City of Los Angeles is going to be involved in the proposition of permitting these pipelines, then it ought to be involved in the proposition of ensuring that our residents are safe, not just from the pollutants that come out from it, but from the stress of knowing that you're living on something that at any time could cause a problem for you. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, we'll move to questions now from the commission. Okay, I'd just like to back up a little bit, just starting with the oil drilling site. So I saw 4 over the weekend. So who owns the oil drilling sites?
Well, of the 2 of the 4 drilling sites that I don't know all the ones that you visited, but I think you were out off of La Cienega, right? And you went to the Murphy drill site, and you went to the Jefferson drill site. Those 3 are all owned by Freeport-McMoRan Oil and Gas, which is a multi-billion-dollar oil and minerals company, really with operations around the globe. Allen Co. is a small family-run operation, which is based out of Signal Hill, Long Beach.
Okay.
Well, Angela's just reminding me, too, that 2 of those parcels are owned by the LA Archdiocese. They're leased to Allen Co. and Freeport-McMoRan.
Okay. And if one of you could speak to the health impacts to residents, just what are sort of the physical impacts? What are the physical health ailments that people have who are in these neighborhoods?
So residents in our neighborhood complain of chronic headaches, nosebleeds, asthma attacks. Those are the principal concerns. And just, I think, stress under the noise is just, the intensity of the noise is really kind of unimaginable.
Okay. The City of Los Angeles has also requested that we create a health registry for the city. Do you have any recommendations on how we would do that, or other states or cities that have created health registries for people who live in impacted areas for oil drilling?
On the questions of health registries, I would defer on that, but I would note that I would want there to be very deep consideration to what the function would be of such a registry. So if what you're trying to get at is how to track health impacts over time, and what you're asking is that people voluntarily submit their health information, it's not clear to me that that's going to be a sufficiently robust system to track harms associated with either ongoing operations at a drill site or, say, short leaks or whatever that are associated with pipelines. And so I would want us to think very carefully about a health registry and what we think it ought to be doing. That said, for the city to have a way for people to officially complain about experiences could be helpful, but I'd want to talk more about a health registry.
Commissioners, questions?
A couple of things.
Actually, could you please say your name? I'm sorry.
Oh, yes, John Hissrich, not Erica Hawkes. A couple of, have any health agencies, state or county, examined this in the sense of looking at the health impacts or inspected from a health perspective any of these sites?
Well, we've had a couple of people. We've had, it turns out that LA County has a plant pathologist who has been willing to look at some of the plant pathology around those plants that I showed you that had been killed and, kind of confirmed that this looked like it was as a result of acid. We've had folks out from the county health department, and they've sat on the porch with residents and they've said, this is really common around these drill sites that there's these problems. It's very convincing. And, and we've said to them, would you put that in writing for us? We'd really like to take that into a public hearing. And then they disappear. So I have personally found that the LA County Health Department has really not been there for us in the way that we've needed, to help us really document the health impacts.
And I assume the state as well has even not been involved, I assume. State health. Very often they defer to the county and local areas, so I suspect that that's the case.
I have no experience with the
Okay.
state health.
Now, a second question.
Angela, did you want to respond to that?
I just want to add to that quickly. If what we're talking about is the health impacts from the drill site, then, there is similar health impacts that have been seen in Aliso Canyon, right? So
Right.
it's not that...
And it got a lot of attention.
It got a lot of attention. Not everybody gets that attention. They deserve that attention. And it points to a bigger issue about the impacts of fossil fuel, whether that be storage or existing in its natural state, and what impacts that might have on surrounding communities. And I'll also just note that while the agencies have not rushed to identify the impacts that are particularly associated with these sites, although we have community testimony about them, we do know a lot about the chemical constituents that are used there, and there's very clear evidence around those health harms.
Okay. Second question had to do with the economics of it. You indicated that they're using the acid because the yield is have you gotten any sense from them of when the yield's going to get to the point where the cost of doing it is just essentially, say, to close?
We've asked that question. What they tell us is they think they have another 40 years.
Oh. Okay. And then just as the last comment, the city of Los Angeles does have a fire marshal who heads the Fire Prevention Bureau of the fire department. Now, they are often criticized for being notoriously behind in their inspections. They do inspect some industrial sites, I think possibly related to the petroleum industry. I have no idea whether they do the pipelines and those operations, we might take a look into that because I am aware that they have that function. How they do it, I don't know.
I can tell you that I went to the fire office to look at their files for the 3 South Los Angeles drill sites, and there were certainly records of people paying fees back in the 60s when they started these sites, but the records around inspections happening at these sites were quite sparse. We do know that at the Murphy site, the fire department ended up getting involved there because of a range of issues associated with the impacts that site was clearly having. And when they did go to inspect, what they did find was that the site had no fire suppression equipment. And they had no fire suppression equipment and were cited for that. And then they lied and said that they had fire suppression equipment. And then when they went back for a reinspection, they learned that they actually didn't. And all of this was happening, and the fire department was insisting to the community that they did not have the authority to stop this facility from continuing to extract oil, even though it was clear that if there were an accident, they would not be able to put the fire out.
Commissioner Mandel.
Howard Mandel. First of all, I'm very sympathetic to your cause, and I thank you for being here. Though I do have some questions. First of all, some of the studies that you're describing, the impacts on people, they're in vitro studies and they're not in vivo studies. And one of the problems with some of your hypotheses is that there has not been necessarily documented harm to local community. So I don't know about the 4 sites that you're describing, but I do know there's been a major analysis of another one, the major site that is on Olympic Boulevard, just outside of Beverly Hills into Los Angeles. And there was epidemiologic analysis of those communities, and there was no increased impact on people either 1 mile, 2 mile, or 3 miles out, including in the different circles. So there needs to be some epidemiologic impact other than stress, which I agree, living next to a drilling site or a chemical site is definitely problematic for people, and I'm very sympathetic to that. But some of the other claims you're making, as an obstetrician, your statement about the 7-month pregnancy is just factually not true, because hydrocarbons do not cross the placenta, and so if they're in the air, they'll be entrapped in the lung, possibly harmful to the mother. I don't disagree with that. But they don't get bloodborne. They don't cross the placenta unless you can show me some data other than that. And I would like to read that if that's true, because you're probably the first person who's demonstrated that. In regards to endocrine impacts, I'm not sure what you mean by endocrine impacts, because the endocrine system is a separate system which has feedback and negative feedback, and hydrocarbons have not been shown to, in vivo, to have an impact on people. So I'm not sure what you're referring to as an endocrine impact.
Well, I'm not a chemist or a doctor, but I can read those chemical warning labels, and they very clearly say Sufotron, harmful if inhaled, danger to fertility, and I actually don't have the wording with me here, but harmful to the unborn child. So that's not a hydrocarbon issue, that's a chemical issue, and the issue that I'm raising is that many harmful chemicals, tens of thousands of pounds of chemicals, harmful chemicals, air toxins, carcinogens, endocrine disruptors, all quantified at AQMD through public disclosure, are being brought in and deployed underneath these communities, often in a very reckless way.
There's no question there needs to be oversight, and there's no question there needs to be a protection for local communities. I'm not denying that, and I think there should be, and government ought to be involved in regulation as well as in assuring the safety of the public. There should be no debate there. The problem is that there needs to be proof of causation to some of the statements you're making. Otherwise, it's just rhetoric. So yes, it's true that there are labels that say those things. And I'll admit to you, you should not drink any of those things, and a pregnant woman shouldn't drink any of those things, and kids shouldn't drink any of those things. And getting it in the groundwater is much more concern as a physician or as a scientist than the airborne. There is possible that the airborne aspect of hydrocarbons is problematic. I just haven't seen data of that. And if so, that's a much bigger question for the city of Los Angeles or for the county of Los Angeles. I'm not against looking for research to study that. I just think that you need to present that kind of stuff. Clearly, if there's a leak, it is very problematic, and we need to prevent leaks and or make sure that there isn't corrosion of the pipeline. There's no question of that. The other thing that's important is all hydrocarbons are not the same. So where some aerate more than others, the problem in Aliso Canyon is not the same as what might happen with oil or some of the other hydrocarbons that you might be pumping out of whatever sites there are in the four local community that we're talking about in South Los Angeles. One could be worse, one could be better, I don't know. But my understanding is it doesn't aerate as much. And so unless you can have scientific proof to us, other than that, we can't make a scientific or rational decision on how to help you do what you really want to do, which is to add better protection to the community and or close down the sites.
So I appreciate the questions that you're raising, and I too will acknowledge that I'm not a doctor, but I can read also. And ATSDR tells us that what we're talking about is total petroleum hydrocarbons. It's not just hydrocarbons that exist in and of themselves. They are associated with a bunch of chemicals. They come bound together. And so what they tell us is that there are a bunch of compounds that form these total hydrocarbons, and they have various different impacts. And what they say is very little is known about the toxicity of many TPH compounds. And then they go on and to give us a paragraph about animal testing and why we shouldn't be concerned about that, but they follow up by saying, animal studies have shown effects on the lungs, central nervous system, liver, kidney, developing fetus, and reproductive system from exposure to TPH compounds, generally after breathing or swallowing the compounds. So there is a body of literature out there that talks about the chemicals that are associated with hydrocarbons, that are co-located with hydrocarbons. The hydrocarbons never exist by themselves. They exist with other kinds of gases and chemicals that are naturally occurring, which is why I included this list of the table of constituents commonly found in crude oil. So I appreciate the concern that you're raising, but I want to suggest that there is a body of literature that does link those things together by looking at the individual compounds that are associated with hydrocarbons. The second thing that I will say is I understand the importance of having evidence for claims. I really do. I think that that's really one of the things that make the whole world go round. But I will also tell you that the question here is how do we act in the absence of complete information? What are we supposed to do for and in these communities when we have suspicions that there are harms? We've got community reports of being harmed. We've got evidence that shows that the compounds that are commonly found in crude oil causes a range of harms. And the answer to those communities could be, well, we're very sorry, but unless you go out and figure out how to do some epi-studies, we're not going to be able to do much to deal with it. Or we could take a precautionary approach where we try to limit the exposures that would occur, that we take seriously that our not having a system that tracks harms across time and space is not the fault of the communities that are living in proximity to where these harms could be occurring. And what we do instead is we think seriously and hard about whether or not we should be exposing communities to what range of hazards, particularly in a world where we are trying to deal head on with the question of fossil fuels for energy, and how those impact the broader infrastructure and what that's going to mean for us for continuing survival on the planet. So I understand entirely what you're saying, and I agree. I would love to have studies. I would feel so much better walking into court with a stack of studies that I could throw on the table and say, just make it happen, Your Honor. Right? I would love that. But that's not the world that we're living in. And so the question is, what do we do now? And so I think from a health perspective, because you can't unbreathe them and you can't get rid of them once they get inside of you, and yes, some of them you can pee out, but the fact of the matter is they have harms and impacts that are real and significant, and some of them manifest themselves in various different ways over time, and I think that's something that we should take seriously.
You haven't proved causation. You have to prove causation first.
I have to prove causation in a court of law.
In the scientific evidence you have to do.
In the scientific world, we have to prove causation. But in the world of policy making, I think that the hurdle ought to be for the community, that it's more likely than not you're being exposed to some risks, and the city has, as the person, as the entity that's responsible for overseeing that from a policy making perspective, we're going to do something about it. So I have children, and I tell my children, I've told my son when he was young, don't run with scissors in your hand. Not because every time you run with scissors in your hand you fall and put an eye out, but why would you take the risk? We tell people don't drink and drive, not because every time you drive and get behind the wheel you crash into somebody, but we know from a policy perspective if we can reduce that behavior, reduce bad outcomes. And so what we're talking about here is how are we going to reduce behaviors that could result in bad outcomes? And how much risk should communities be willing to bear in order to extract fossil fuels? And what are we going to do as a policy matter in order to address those questions? And that's not a question of causation, and it's not a question of science, and it's not a question of proof in court. That's a question about how progressive we're going to be as a community when we think about what we expose people to.
Well, thank you so much for your presentation.
Can you please say your name?
Sorry, Commissioner Erica Hawkes. Again, thank you for your presentation. I think it's incredibly important work what you're doing, going out to the community. I've dedicated my life to environmental justice issues, and not knowing the external negative externalities that were directly impacted to myself and my family by having the 60 freeway in our backyard until later in life. Addressing the issue about the goods movement Alameda corridor, noticing in the 30th Senate District how our children were becoming asthmatic. They had cancer. We had issues of the chrome crankshaft suva issue, leaked into the water, miscarriages, across the board. And today, still addressing the issue of exide. And it's always an issue of lower socioeconomic populations that continue to be plagued with these types of entities. I mean, you look at, if you just want to look at two things in general, the response to Porter Ranch versus exide. Well, first issue one, in full disclosure, I did work for the gas company for about a year, and understanding that their activists and it's a good partner in addressing the issue was one issue, but still, the residents, they mobilized pretty quickly. Councilmember Mitch Englander jumped on it, and they got the visibility and the media surrounding this area. So the issue comes down to this, is I understand it's just always these negative externalities always impacting these communities that don't have a voice, don't even know it's in their backyard until someone gets sick or their children get sick. And then you have to worry about the issues of plumage. You got an issue about redevelopment. Is it in the soil? Does it leak? There's so many different ways it can directly impact our community's health. And so that's just seeing it time and time again is my concern. So my issue is, I know that you've worked with one of the biggest champions that you have is Congresswoman Han Waters. And I'm really surprised that there hasn't been a task force or some type of entity to have your state, assembly, senate, congressional, and local city addressing this issue. Because currently, I'm also serve on the Housing Authority Commission, and we're dealing with Jordan Downs, and we're not letting them move forward on redevelopment until they can give me a specific bill of health that we can move forward, because guess what? When you demolish that property, it's not going to stay self-contained. And understanding those issues, and also understanding the issue of what recently came to light with DTSC. Folks, and these reports are possibly falsified. Why? Because there are a lot of emails that were going back and forth with racial undertones. And so you have to really re-examine exactly, one, the reporting is accurate, and two, you actually have a report done. And so my concern is, on top of many, first of all, I think it's wonderful that you're going out there, but it's a matter of what's next. I personally don't feel comfortable walking away from this meeting knowing what this community is dealing with and not helping advocate in any other way. And I'm not sure as far as our commission, what we're able to do, but as far as, just lending my services to you, anything I can do to help you with at every level of government, just because it is such an important issue to me, and I'm tired of our community always being plagued with these opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you.
Matt, very brief, one-word answer requested. At our February commission hearing, we received an in-depth overview of oil extraction in South Los Angeles from Nancy Halpern-Ibrahim of Esperanza and the Stand LA Coalition, and her recommendation in response to Commissioner Jaquez's question to you. At that point in time, when I asked her that question, was for the city planning and building and safety to adopt and enforce a 1,500-foot buffer. Do you agree or disagree with that recommendation we received in February?
Agree 100%.
Thank you.
Are there any other recommendations that you have?
I had a follow-up
In
question.
addition to
In
that?
terms of Commissioner Hawkins, is there anything that we would take action on or anything that we would be able to move forward to on? Or I'm not sure as far as our role as a commission, what we can and can't do.
Well, we have a very broad latitude here. One of the things that I'd like to see, because I think this is quite a big issue and we have 6 months to report back, I've been in a lot of different communities, and I work with homeless and low-income communities, so I'm aware of a lot of the pollution issues and a lot of the issues that you raised living close to 60 Freeway. And I just think that because it's such a broad issue, it would be great to create a subcommittee to deal with this through our health commission so that we can look at each one of the communities and how they're being impacted. And this is sort of the petroleum portion of what we've been requested from the city council to take up. But we also have to deal, I think, with natural gas as well. And so with a 6-month time frame in terms of the request, we don't necessarily have to meet that 6-month time frame. I would like to, though, because I think these communities have a right to have an answer from this commission in terms of what we're recommending. I would say that I would like to move, actually, that we create a subcommittee, and those commissioners who are interested in working on this, I know I am, I think Commissioner Vick is as well, to move forward on creating a subcommittee so that we can work with our community partners and try to find out what's really going on in these communities. Okay. So I'd like to make that a motion. Can I get a second?
I'd like to second that.
Great. It's been moved and seconded to create a subcommittee to deal with the council request to take up petroleum and natural gas health impacts. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you so much. And we'll move to public comment. We have one more presentation, then we'll move to public comment on this issue. If you haven't gotten a card yet for public comment, if you could please see Candy Rosales, who's here from the city clerk's office. And I'd like to thank Candy for all of her help putting this meeting together. This is our first community meeting, and it was not easy to put together. Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to our next presentation.
I'd like to say good evening, everyone, and thank you for your indulgence. Persistence pays off. And that's what we have to really do, not only in our daily lives, but in the patients and population that we serve. So today I was asked...
If you could wait for just a moment. I just wanted to introduce you because this is actually being recorded. So for people who will be listening back on this is Dr. Condessa Curley, who is an MD. She's the Area Medical Director for SPA 5 and 6 from the Los Angeles Department of Public Health, speaking on the disparities in healthcare quality for racial and ethnic minority groups. Thank you for coming.
Thank you again. So I've been tasked to talk about the disparities in access in medical care, access to physicians and specialists, discuss disparities in screenings and treatment protocols in relation to preventable diseases, and also a little bit about, what it is that we are doing in order to reduce and or eliminate disparities. Now, this is a huge topic, and I'm going to do it in justice because I've only got 15 minutes, but I'm going to give it my best for you. So when we talk about what we need for quality health care, we need two types of information. We need information about the patient, and we need medical science that's relevant to patient care. I know a lot of you have probably heard the buzzwords evidence-based medicine. That's exactly what we need. Now, when we talk about quality of health care, this requires that these two types of information are easily brought together in the same place at the same time through the lenses of the social determinants of health. Same place, same time through the lenses of the social determinants of health. Now, some of you may not be familiar with social determinants of health. Well, as we all know, that health and health problems result from a complex interplay of a number of forces. The most important forces that impact population, the health outcomes of groups of individuals, are the social and economic environments in which we live, learn, work, and play. Collectively, these are called the social determinants of health. So I'm just going to step back a little bit. I chose to target women, and this information comes from the Office of Women's Health, LA County Department of Public Health. And if we sit back and we look and we see what are the top social determinants of health within this demographic, what we see is health, education. Okay, if you're not very well educated, then the health impact is going to be enormous. Unemployment, or you're looking for work. Your ability to have a roof over your head. Can you pay your mortgage or your rent? And food insecurity. Yes, food insecurity is huge, especially in this demographic. Now, what LA County Department of Public Health does is we collect surveillance, and once we collect that surveillance, we identify the key health indicators. And this document is available to anyone who wants to go on our website, and this is for March 2013. The data for March 2015 is currently being put into place. So, with this information, we better understand our individual health and our health of our communities, and this information gives us the foundation so that the communities, providers, government agencies, businesses, schools, and other organizations can work together to create positive change and to improve the health and well-being of the residents of LA throughout their lifespan. So we all know the demographics about LA County. We're a little bit over close to 10 million in population. And if you look at where we stand insofar as race and ethnicity, it's Latino, white, and African American in that order. That's the largest. And if you look at the age group that's the largest within our demographics of LA County, we look at the age groups between 13 to 39 and 40 to 64. This is key when we're talking about disparities. So, and going back and looking at women, we look at the leading causes of death among women in Los Angeles. And this data was presented in 2011. And what we see here is stroke, number one. Number two, heart attack and cardiovascular disease, which is related to stroke, is number one. Alzheimer's disease, that's number 4 in our county. Lung disease, number 5. Breast cancer, number 6. And diabetes, number 8. And then if you look to see what demographic this really affects the most, it disproportionately affects Blacks and Latinas. So I wanted to step back and just give you a glimpse of what's happening in our SPA 6. Now, SPA is service planning area. LA County is divided into 8 service planning areas. I am the area medical director for SPA 5 and 6. And SPA 6 is South Los Angeles. So what I did was I went and I looked over the past from 2009 to 2013 to see exactly what the indicators were and how they changed, not only in LA County, but in reference to our SPA. So if you look at the physical determinants of health, and one of those which was really important was, do adults believe that their neighborhood is safe from crime? Now, if you look at LA County in general, about 82% felt that way. If you look at SPA 6 in 2009, only 57% felt that way. Now, we know that as we progressed forward with LA County, it bumped up just a little bit to 84.3, but in SPA 6, it remained very close to 64.4. So there was a slight increase in people feeling that they were comfortable. Then we looked at access to health care, and we looked at the folks that were insured from 18 to 64. And what we found is that only 32.9% in 2009 felt that they had adequate access to health care. And if you move to 2013, that number didn't change very much, 38.2. It did increase somewhat. Now, going on to those that are insured 0 to 17 years of age, it's really it decreased just a little bit. It was 9.7%, and it went down to 8.6%. Now, if you look at medical care, those adults feeling like they have access to medical care, only 38.8% back in 2009 felt so, and then 17.7% in 2013. If we look at those that have a regular source of care, adults, and those 0 to 17 years old, well, the adults, that number decreased. And with the Affordable Care Act, that number did increase slightly in SPA 6. You know, we look at chronic diseases, but I want to really focus on the demographic that's impacted the most in our community, and that's our young folk between 13 to 34. If you look at the incidence of AIDS, AIDS in our population in 2009, it was 16.4%. It has gone up to 32.3%. If you look at primary and secondary syphilis, in 2009, it was 8.6%. It has gone up to 10.5%. If you look at the incidence of chlamydia and gonorrhea, and you may think chlamydia and gonorrhea, well, you go back to AIDS, and sexually transmitted infections are the gateway to HIV, and ultimately, if you're not in care, going forward onto AIDS. And both of those numbers increased drastically. Now, I just really want to let you know this. In 2009, 922.2 per 100,000 were infected with chlamydia. In 2013, 999.5 were infected with chlamydia. If you look at the county as a whole, only 500 and some odd per 100,000 were infected. And this is not just recently. It's endemic. It's been in our community for a long time. The same with the numbers of gonorrhea. So, going back to those health indicators, we talked about people who felt that it was safe in their community, and there were lots that felt it wasn't safe. If you talk about health status, most people reported that that their health status in South LA was fair or poor. Access to care, it increased slightly among 0 to 17, but it decreased among 18 to 64. We talk about sources of care, regular sources of care, and the highest amount that felt that they did not have a regular source of care were both 0 to 17 and 18 to 64-year-olds. Access to health care. And this was the people that felt that they had the most difficulty in accessing health care were the adults. This is in SPA 6. So I just wanted to paint a picture for you. You look at the graph there, and it kind of shows you where we are compared to the other SPAs. And you can see, that we have the worst record of not feeling safe in our communities in SPA 6. Now, what I wanted to do was I went back and I said, well, why is that? So we did some mapping, and we looked at all the gangs in SPA 6. And what we determined, and you can see everywhere where there's alphabets, like G, P, V, W, X, and all of those, you can see that there are numerous gangs that are located in South Los Angeles. And then if we look at those who felt they had the difficulty accessing medical care, we already said in SPA 6, we have the highest amount of folks that feel that way. Well, you know what? If you look at Martin Luther King Jr. Center for Public Health, it's right there in the corner of 118th and Wilmington. If you go and if you look at this map and you'll see South Health Center, that's our old site, and that was 120th Street. If you look at these purple and red and brown squares, triangles, those are where the gangs are located. So currently at MLK, we have an evening clinic that is open until 8 o'clock on Thursday evenings. Providing access. What do you think? How many people do you think that we see on a Thursday evening? We're supposed to see about 15. On average, if we max it out, it's 5. So we're providing access. If you look at that map, it's kind of like there's a halo effect. You see MLK, CPH. Well, you know, if you see that's gang territory, and it's difficult for you to maneuver that without going through gang territory. When we were at South Health Center, however, the numbers were huge. I mean, we were just overtime all the time. And you can see where South Health Center is in relation to the gangs. We can make a conclusion or an assumption that access was better. Now, you want to know, well what organizations, what community-based organizations are in our community? These are all of the community clinics that are within our census tract and SPA 6. And there are quite a few. I believe they're like 55. We also have mobile units that go throughout our SPA. And we have about 8 organizations that have mobile units. Now, these mobile units, what they do, they go out and they screen. And what we found is that they refer. But when they refer the patients or the clients who have something, a medical concern or problem, the referral rate, meaning that the folks that actually get back and go to the place where they referred, is about 44%. We talked a little bit earlier about the communicable diseases, and we said that we have the highest incidence of HIV/AIDS among adolescents and youth and adults in LA County. We have the second highest incidence in LA County of primary and secondary syphilis, and the highest incidences of both gonorrhea and chlamydia in the county. And this shows that again. The yellow is gonorrhea and the red line is chlamydia compared to the other SPAs. So what I thought about, in our meetings, we said, well, let's look at this. We said that we have at least 55 community-based organizations that are in our SPA actively working. We've got about 6 mobile units that are actually out about in our community. And then we have the gangs. So what I wanted to do was superimpose not only the mobile units on top of where the gangs were, on top of where the community clinics are, on top of where we have the most amount of chlamydia in our SPA. And as you can see, the darker brown red colors, those are the colors where those are the places where we have up to 104 cases. So what you can see is that, we're there. We're in some of the spots, but in the spots that we really need to be in, we're not. And why is that? Let's go back and we'll look at chlamydia. And if you overlay both of them, it's the same thing. The darker blue, the black, those are places where we have the greatest amount. So the reason that we kind of thought about this is that, we have a lot of folks that are in our community. We have a lot of physicians that are in our community. And, they're doing a great job. I mean, if you look at some of our chronic diseases, they have gone down. If you look at breast cancer, gone down, except in the Latino population for many reasons. Diabetes, that's gone down. Even though, cardiovascular disease is the number 1 killer of women, it's still gone down, yet and still it's unacceptable. So why is that? Well, we look at the providers and the amount of providers that we have in LA County. And if you were to look at a rural area, and like in San Bernardino, and you compare it to some places in Los Angeles, we are a desert of physicians and providers. Here you'll see the healthcare providers and by type and by region. And by healthcare providers, I mean physicians that can be medical doctors or doctors of osteopathy, nurse practitioners, and physician assistants. So if you look at Los Angeles, we've got about 81% that are MDs, small percentage that are DOs, about 12% that are nurse practitioners, and about 10% that are physician assistants. And you say, well, that sounds pretty good, but where are these folks and what type of providers are they? Well, this is the key here is that if we look at our primary care providers, if you can see there that in Los Angeles County, that's only 62% of the 62 per 100,000 that are treating our population. Whereas you look at specialists, that's 139 per 100,000 that are treating our population. If you look at nationally, you'll see the two bars here, and one bar, it'll show you the recommendations, and that's the grayer bar. And the recommendations say you should be up to 80 for primary care physicians. And then if you look at for specialists and their supply, it's well above the norm. But we haven't hit that 80%. We're like right on the cusp. Yes, thank you. Thank you. Then if you look at medically underserved areas, now we live in Los Angeles, and if you look at where do providers want to come, everybody wants to come and practice in sunny Southern California, but where is it that they want to practice? Do you think that we would have medically underserved areas in Los Angeles? We do. Now, if you go to the Office of State Health and Population Medicine, they have a website that will actually give you a graph or a map of where people are. And, you wonder, well, how do I become a medically underserved area? Well, if you have a percentage of a population at 100% below the poverty line, if you have a percentage of a population that's over 65, if you have a high infant mortality rate, and if primary care physicians per 100,000 population are low, that means you meet the criteria. Now, we've met the criteria in multiple places in Los Angeles, and we've definitely met the criteria in South Los Angeles. So this is just a map that shows you where we are. And I'm sorry it's a little bit, the grays and the blues you kind of can't see very well. But if you look at Los Angeles, and you look at Riverside, you look at Imperial, you look at San Bernardino, those dark areas, we have places in Los Angeles that are equivalent to San Bernardino, Riverside, and Imperial. And if you look even further, the lighter blue, I don't know if you can see that, we have a huge medically underserved population in certain parts of Los Angeles. And we've been given the designation of medically underserved area in Los Angeles. So, you may say, so what are we doing about this huge disparity? I mean, we have a disparity where we don't have enough physicians that are in the right place. We have a disparity where between blacks and Latinos, all of the health indicators are almost double what that is in their Caucasian or Asian counterparts. We have a huge disparity. So we look at how we treat people. So from the past to the present, we treated individuals, we treated in institutions, we focused on the professional caregivers, and we only use technology to support current processes. Where are we going? Well, population-based medicine. We're treating groups. We're treating people in the home and in communities. We're involving friends and family and other caregivers. We're using technology to disrupt this current process. We're not delivering care just in the clinics. We are now outside of the walls of the clinics. We're in the community. We're in the work site. What we're doing in the community is that, we talk about blood pressure, high blood pressure, stroke, number 2 killer of African Americans, women. We need to know, how can we approach this? What can we do about this? Well, there are a couple of studies, 52 studies that talked about, how are we teaching folks how to take their blood pressure? I mean, what are we doing? Do we make it so that the person has to go to the provider, and we already know that there's a problem with access? We already know that, we have the Affordable Care Act, and in the public health department, what we see is that a lot of our patients are covered with insurance. But they come to us because there is no copay. They also come to us because they don't have to wait 6 months to see a physician. And these are people who are, in lower socioeconomic status. So, we have mechanisms where we can really look at how can we educate people to do more for themselves, to be self-reliant. And studies have shown, monitoring your blood pressure at home, it decreases the blood pressure. It improves the blood pressure. Doing this for just 6 months, you see a substantial gain, a lowering in your blood pressure. Doing it for 12 months, you see a substantial lowering of your blood pressure. So we need to be able to train patients to use this tool. We need to be able to share these readings with our healthcare providers during medical visits by telephone or electronically. Right now, with the county, we are now undergoing electronic medical records. Department of Health Services, they are already entrenched, and Department of Public Health, we are now going to that route. When we talk about electronic health service, electronic medical records, we talk about, patients having access to us, emailing us, texting us. All of these things that can be done electronically using technology are key for our future. We talked, a little bit about technology. Well, what can technology do? Well, it can provide us with a more efficient model of care across the economic and geographic spectrum. I can tell you this: 85% of my patients that walk into the clinic have cell phones. 85. And if you look at the generation, I can call my nieces or nephews on the phone. Will they answer me? No. When I text them, immediately. So we have to think about how we can use technology to really get at these barriers. And we know that technology can help close the gap, decrease the barriers, improve access, improve patient satisfaction, and improve staff satisfaction. And we know that it can positively impact all of our targeted key indicators. Telemedicine is now something that is used basically for rural areas. If you go back and you look at those medically underserved areas, we are a rural area here. We are equivalent to that. And so now it's time for us to really think about how we can use telemedicine or technology to get at the hard-to-reach places that we have seen on the slides, where we have multiple community-based organizations, healthcare organizations, and mobile units. They're screening. They're not treating at the point of care. That's the problem. And so with telemedicine, equipping a mobile unit with the telemedicine where you have a sending unit is the mobile unit, the receiving unit is the actual health center. The doctor gets on the phone when the MA that's in the mobile unit calls and says, hey, I got this patient. She doesn't have her partner, but I believe she has this. The doctor does the assessment. The doctor prescribes, and the patient is immediately given the prescription. And if it's a sexually transmitted infection, the patient is then given partner-delivered therapy. We have to meet the patients where they are. When you say access, it's only been one way. It's got to be bi-directional, and we're not doing that for our patients. So, when you talk about the circle of influence, we really have to look at the circle of influence to address how we're going to reduce and or eliminate disparities. The circle of influence includes self-management programs by the patient, family involvement, clinical expertise in systems, and those systems can be EMR and technology. Looking at the workplace, looking at the schools. I have young kids that come to me and they say, Dr. Curley, we did a survey and we found out that there are a lot of students that have problems with substance abuse. More importantly, alcohol or distracted driving. So what we did was we went and we gave them an Alateen survey. And these students, 162 of them, took this survey. And what Alateen says is that if you mark 1 on this survey, that means that you're a candidate for some type of support. 162 of them came back with 1 or more. There's a huge need, so we have to be in the schools as well. We talk about community awareness and action. We have a lot of community programs, but sometimes they're in silos, and then breaking that silo so that we could actually come together to utilize our resources and utilize the resources of the Department of Public Health. Environmental measures we just got finished talking about, and policy of all is really very important. So that's my presentation. Any questions?
Commissioner Mandel.
Thank you for the wonderful presentation and the data that you presented to us. One of the interesting aspects of the problem that you have in SPA 6 is that even though people are, quote, insured, significant percentage of those patients have Medi-Cal and or through Covered California. where 90% of patients are subsidized. Unfortunately, with Covered California, there are very narrow networks, and we see the same thing with the Medi-Cal population as well, that the government has not allowed the networks to be wide enough. So patients are very restricted in order to keep the costs down to the payer, i.e. us, the people of California, which is a big problem with the federal government. Until that changes, you're not going to really see a major impact because there is a shortage of physicians, but Medi-Cal doesn't really reimburse significantly in comparison to Medicaid across the country. So the last time I checked, of the 50 states, we're number 49 in reimbursement for each individual patient care visit. And so that's a big problem because we're actually cost more to live here than in Alabama, yet a physician in Alabama will get paid more per unit service than they would if they were in SPA 6. Until that changes, you're not going to really see a change in the number of physicians who are really going there unless there's some other incentive for them to go there, which is why you have to come up with your other creative things with extending MAs, et cetera, to do that. And there are some states, Colorado has done that really well, where they've looked at community health centers and they've actually empowered for certain things like STIs that MAs under supervision of not even advanced practice nurses, but regular nurses, working on the protocols with a physician above them all, can treat STIs and or routine urine infections and things of that nature, which are large numbers of what you see in the clinics. In regards to the problem with the gangs, which is a really major problem in regards to getting access, I think we need to somehow get the different aspects of the government to get together. Because the gangs can also be outreach to your patient population, and we have to, get over the fact that the gangs aren't just a criminal element; they're actually a sense of their own little community and
social network.
And we have to somehow figure out a way that we could work with them to either have a timeout so people can go to your health center. We do this in war zones. That Doctors Without Borders actually have their clinics and/or their cars, with red H's on top of the cars. Maybe we're going to have to do that. That people have a temporary little red H, just like if I'm going to order pizza, I put a little thing on top of my car and I drive and I deliver pizza. Then perhaps we need to have the community have ways to go through the gang community at night, so that the gangs understand that they're going to a health center for their own well-being of their own community. And I think the gangs might be able to understand that, but that's going to take some creative thought and also a change in the way we do business, because otherwise we're not going to really change those numbers that you're going to change. And it's really unfortunate because this is a socioeconomic problem directly related to healthcare. But until the state of California and the Assembly really forces Medi-Cal to pay more, you're not really going to see a big improvement. The last thing I would say is, unfortunately, is that the Affordable Care Act gave significant amounts of money that used to be disproportionate share hospital funds. And the County of Los Angeles was the number one recipient of DSH money, and that's going to go down in 2017, 2018 as mandated by federal law. Potentially the Congress could change that or delay it, because if not, our county, more than any other county in the country, is going to have worse impact. And if you look at your spas, guess which spa is going to get the biggest hit? It's going to be Spa 5 and 6.
Hi, Commissioner Erica Hawkes. Thank you so much for your presentation. It's really interesting. I used to work for the Secretary of Housing before coming back to LA. And the one issue that was very unsettling to us was finding out that a zip code could dictate a child's life expectancy. And that's just not right. It's just a huge social justice issue that I just take issue with. It's just in trying to figure out ways to address it so that that's not the norm. So currently I work for Ultimate, which is the largest FQHC, but like you've mentioned, it's that how to recruit physicians to come to work for the community, addressing their large reimbursement for their student loan repayment plans, and constantly going to the legislature to make sure that they continue to fund that program, because ultimately we're losing physicians there. But one of the things that we also worked on, the issue with the Latino community, it's not just about health, one size fits all. You have to be culturally competent. And one of the things that I've worked on with the Senate and also currently Ultimate worked out really well was the issue of promotoras. Mm-hmm. And we feel like, you have promotoras and you have your physician and you're locked. And I think that's the reason why you do have the decrease in diabetes and obesity. That was the other issue we made sure we introduced, and Mr. Sharp remembers this SB 19, where we took the junk food out of the schools, because we understood that the inner city communities, you looked at their free and lunch programs and the high in fats, and it was just huge service, and then the kids couldn't work, didn't have physical activity because of the smog alerts. I mean, there's so many issues into play. So I felt like the diabetes collaborative and the promotores actually went out there, really did make move the needle in that respect. And also another thing that we do focus on is the whole issue of HIV and AIDS in a bicultural, sensitive issue, especially in the Latino community. It's definitely one of those taboo discussions. And our communities, we've done really well as far as taking the mobile units and actually going to clubs and going out in the evenings to go ahead and utilize those services. And we've noticed that people are actually quite frequently accessing those services, which is also great. Another issue that we're working on with the Housing Authority is we're actually trying to bring in FQHCs into the Housing Authorities so that people have the one-stop shop right then and there. So there's no issues about gang retaliation and violence. It's just ultimately it's right there. So that's worked out really well, as well as Secretary Castro just introduced the whole issue of the digital divide. So now we're looking at wiring all of our housing authorities and making sure they have a technology village. So definitely there's all the components going on. It's just a matter of just bringing it in, but ultimately it comes down to resources. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
So I just had a quick question. Thank you so much for your presentation. Have you noticed a disparity in terms of healthcare quality in the doctor-patient relationship specifically?
Well, I think the idea of culture, currently when you look at South Los Angeles, what we see is that those that went to medical school, graduated, did their residencies, that came back to the community to serve, really there's a higher ratio of or increase in patient-physician dynamics. That's seen to the point of, even in an STD clinic, if you're out and you're in the supermarket and someone comes over and say, "That's my doctor," and you say, "But I've only seen you in the STD clinic." But yet and still there's this, "That's my doctor." So I just think that it speaks to the culture. It speaks to, getting folks that are culturally competent back in our community. And I believe that there's training that's lacking. And there's training that's lacking not only when you talk about Latinos and African Americans, also when you talk about LGBTQ folk as well. So, the training is really important, and really identifying folks that want to serve in this community. There is a gap.
Okay. Any other questions? Oh, Commissioner, could you use a microphone? Thank you. And please state your name.
In South Los Angeles, there are a large number of primary care physicians who are paid the capitation, but they never see the patients. And with the federally qualified health centers, it's the reverse. We're reimbursed when you provide the care. Now, one of the things that is happening, at least at the northern end of the service area, is that we're finding that we have an integrated delivery system, and a lot of the patients who come in for mental health care, we're finding that they have diabetes, hypertension, they're assigned to a primary care physician, but the physician has never seen them. So I don't know if you've noticed that. We were looking at access to care. The care is there, but there are two sides to the coin. The primary care physicians are not incentivized, and they're denying the care. And patients often end up going back to the emergency room when they really need care. One of the things that we're doing, we're setting up a health neighborhood, and that would provide the components for whole person care. It's in its infancy at the moment, but we're looking at doing that in CD8 and CD9. So I just wanted to make that comment because we're finding that a lot of people that we are seeing on the mental health side, some of them have never had a physical exam, but they've been assigned to a physician for the last 5 or 10 years. So I just...
Well, we see that a lot as well because tuberculosis is huge in our spa. And there are a lot of comorbid conditions with tuberculosis, one being diabetes, which, if it's out of control, if that means that you have a really hard time in trying to actually get that person to be, his active disease to be cured. And so what we find when we ask those patients this is that, number one, they cannot get in to see their provider because of the long waits. And, if we have a clinic that has open access, same-day service, that's where they come. A lot of people, even though they see the public health sign and we say that we are not an urgent care, emergent care clinic, they still come and we still have to refer them out. The issue of copay, people tend to purchase insurance that they can afford, not looking at the idea that your copay is going to be a little bit different, a little bit higher. We even have physicians who will write prescriptions and say, here, take this to the public health department. So there are a lot of issues with the system that, we see and trying to fix them. It's kind of huge, but your idea of the health neighborhood, also the patient-centered medical home, is huge, and it's just making sure that you include the Department of Public Health in that patient-centered medical home, because typically, we're like way out in the fringes somewhere, and we can provide you with the data. We can provide you with all the information that you would need, indicators. We have all that information, but we're not utilized in that way.
I want to just say thank you again, Dr. Curley. This is Carolyn Andrews-Taylor. And I wanted to ask if you have any information regarding the disparities in breastfeeding, particularly for communities of color.
I personally don't have any recent data. I, for many years, worked in an FQHC, and at that time, which is maybe about 8 years ago, there was great disparity. But that disparity decreased if, the patient, and I think there's an OB-GYN here on the panel somewhere, if the patient had training prior to their breastfeeding training, or if they were connected with WIC. At the FQHC that I worked with, we had a very strong WIC program where they were just invaluable. In fact, we would write prescriptions to WIC, and then the providers would actually call and follow up. So in those instances, we had higher rates of breastfeeding among populations that traditionally don't breastfeed.
Thank you.
Commissioner Sharp.
I appreciate your plug for WIC. I had once worked at WIC, so it's wonderful to hear. Very simple question. What can we do to help? The same question I asked our previous presenters. The City of Los Angeles adopted a plan for a healthy LA last year. It is structured completely around erasing health disparities and what departments and policy and budget can do to achieve that. So with your vantage of SPA 6, which includes several other municipalities, what are the other cities doing that ought to be in Los Angeles' health plan?
Well, I think that, we have a lot of community meetings. Everybody is coming together and work together to try to address this. But the bottom line, it's about the dollars, how they get reimbursed and what they get reimbursed for. And just sitting and listening to some of the meetings, I hear that, like with the testing, the mobile units, they have to see X amount of patients before to get this amount of money. And so, how do you collaborate with someone and say, I want to get on this mobile unit to provide this type of service, and are they worried about taking their dollars away from them? So the collaboration piece, the silo piece, I think that in SPA 6 we're breaking down boundaries in the sense that we have a community engagement room and we have our health educators who are very active in the community and form partnerships. When our health educators go to the gang task force meeting, they go to the Black Health Task Force meeting, they sit on the city planning meeting. I mean, not in the city, just the city of LA, but in Torrance and Inglewood and everywhere else. So the key is that, if the physician, we are in the clinic, but if we have this patient-centered home where we're including folks that can actually go out to find out what other people are doing, educate about what we're doing, I think that's really the key. Is making sure that you have the appropriate people at the right place. Nicole Vick, she's such in your committee, she's our health educator, and she can tell you all about the different communities that she actually goes out and the committees that she sits on, and how we are working to bring them together. The housing issue is huge. Food insecurity is huge, and people are coming to the table to figure this out. They are coming to the table, and that's number one. And then number two, we have to really make sure that we're not going to bite their hand off when they approach us by taking away their economic base.
Any other questions? Okay. Oh.
Commissioner Vick. I didn't know Dr. Curley was coming today, so whoever invited her, thank you. I have the privilege and honor of working with her on a regular basis at our work at the health department. But one thing that she said is really very important. I do supervise 3 health educators, and we also have a cadre of public health nurses that really are engaged in systems change, working with cities on policies and other types of programming. It is very important to figure out ways to help organizations collaborate and not have to fight for the same money. And I think that's one of the issues. If there's anything that we can do as a commission, is to try to figure out ways to, I don't want to say force, because that's not a good word, but foster sort of this cross-sector collaboration where that money can be used meaningfully. And again, folks are not competing for that same pot of money. And also, in some ways, tie that money to the social determinants of health, and not have that money be focused specifically on a specific disease outcome, because we know that that's not really getting to the root of the problem. So that would be my 2 cents just from my public health experience.
Any other questions? Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Okay, at this point, we'll move on to public comment for item number 1, which will encompass all the presentations that you just heard. Dr. Tom Williams, and each speaker will have 2 minutes.
Oh, I think he left.
Okay, Dr. James Sad.
I can't see without my reading glasses. Sure. Good evening. I am a professor of environmental science at Occidental College, and with my colleagues, I have a record of research on air pollution, health impacts, and the patterns of exposure and risk to human populations in Los Angeles and elsewhere throughout California that spans over 2 decades. Oil and gas pipelines are part of a system that includes wells and production facilities that feed them. There's great community concern about living close to these facilities. Now, are these concerns justified? One need look no further than the October 2015 Porter Ranch storage facility incident, the impacts and the tremendous monetary costs that were associated with it. Had this sort of incident taken place in one of the petroleum production facilities that are located in the more densely populated areas of urban Los Angeles, the impacts would have been much greater. The scientific research literature supports the position of clear and specific health impacts associated with the exposure to emissions of the types of chemicals associated with conventional drilling, as well as those that are used for enhanced well stimulation. Over the past decade, at least 685 papers have been published in peer-reviewed scientific journals that are relevant to assessing the impacts of unconventional drilling. 84% of the public health studies contain findings that indicate public health hazards, elevated risks, or adverse health incomes, and 87% of the air quality studies contain findings that indicate elevated air pollution emissions or ambient concentrations. Conventional drilling and production emits benzene. That's a Proposition 65 carcinogen and a reproductive toxin. Exposure to benzene during pregnancy can affect child development and is associated with adverse birth outcomes. Oil production also adds to the burden of local particulate matter and ozone air pollution. These pollutants are known to aggravate asthma symptoms, cause poor birth outcomes, and premature death. Research clearly demonstrates the adverse outcomes that are associated with an increase of exposure to high concentrations of particulate air pollution.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Monique Urardi. And I apologize if I'm not saying your name properly.
Monique Uriarte, thank you. Good evening, all. I'm an ordinary person living on South Los Angeles, but a very eager mother to try to protect the health of my family. My daughter we live in front of an oil drilling called Alenco. My daughter started with health problems when she was 8. She needs to wear for 3 months a heart monitor because for no reason she started experience a very fast palpitations. She started develop nausea, extreme headaches. I need to run with her to emergency. She needs to be referred with cardiologists, gastroenterologists, neurologists, and nobody knows what's wrong with her. This is not only my daughter in our community, it's a dozen of kids experience the same. When I hear the stories from people living around Murphy, Jefferson, I hear the same story. And probably because we live on South Los Angeles, but when I hear the story in upscale neighborhood like a Porter Ranch, I hear the same health effects than our children's. And I think these toxic emissions doesn't discriminate kids. They don't care if that kid lives on South Los Angeles or in another neighborhood. When these kids are exposed to these toxic emissions, they getting sick. And we need to stop that. Thank you.
Thank you. Sam Sukatan.
President Shannon, members of the commission, my name is Sam Sukatan. I'm an organizer with the Sierra Club here in Los Angeles. One, I just want to start by thanking you for coming down to Holman after hours. I live a couple miles north on Western. It's much easier to get here than it is to City Hall. In addition, I just wanted to flag the 39,000 members of the Sierra Club's Angeles chapter in Los Angeles and Orange County stand in solidarity with Stand LA, with Monique, with Angela. We appreciate the presentation today, and we're looking forward to engaging with them and with you as this moves forward. Thank you.
Thank you. General Jeff.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is General Jeff. I am a community activist in Skid Row, but I was born and raised in South Central Los Angeles, now known as South LA. In regards to the two presentations, I don't know if I'll be able to speak to both of them, but I definitely want to speak to the negative health impacts, specifically as it relates to the homeless folks that I deal with on a daily basis in Skid Row. Of which is the homeless capital of America, but there's also, and people come from all across the United States, but there's also a direct pipeline that comes from South Los Angeles. While a lot of their negative attributions are contributed to, whether it's substance abuse, addiction, and mental health, when we specifically look at mental health, as it relates to petroleum drilling in South LA, we have no idea the negative effects that could possibly have on a person's brain. I don't really see too many brain studies, and so it always gets explained away, whether it's mental illness or it's lungs or it's something else. Where are the brain studies? We don't know what the negative impacts really are, and so I would just like this commission to take that into consideration, because there's definitely needs to be extensive research done so that we can actually get more detailed in terms of the analysis that better help us make better decisions in terms of actually helping the people. And just to speak to the second presentation quickly, Commissioner Mandel actually gave a wonderful, unique solution to possibly have the mobile vehicles with the red H to get further into the gang-infested areas, to piggyback off of that and say, here's another potential solution in regards to HIV, to have HIV booths inside of nightclubs. Since they're kind of like meat markets and people like to hang out, I think you can have the mobile clinic outside, you can have a booth on the inside, and people would definitely get tested right then and there. Thank you.
Thank you. Michelle Pritchard.
Good evening. Michelle Pritchard with the Liberty Hill Foundation, and I just wanted to encourage all of you to take a look at the report that I passed out at the beginning of the evening. Our foundation started to hear reports from neighborhoods around the city, most definitely South LA, but also all the way down to Wilmington, where actually half of the city's oil wells are located. And we felt that it really deserves some visibility and some public attention. So I encourage you to read it. It's also available in electronic form on the Liberty Hill website. And if you already have a copy and don't want to pass it on to someone else, I'd be happy to take it back tonight and continue distributing. And I also just wanted to thank you for taking the action tonight of forming a subcommittee, and say that, if there's any way that our foundation can be helpful as you engage in your fact-finding and policy development over the next 6 months. It's not a very long period of time relative to the scope and scale of this issue. So thanks.
Great. Thank you. Okay, that concludes public comment on item number 1. Item number 2 is consideration and discussion of the recommendations of the Health, Mental Health, and Education Committee regarding identifying services, assistance needed for the Commission to complete their duties as detailed in Ordinance number 183093 pursuant to motion by Commissioner Hisserich and Andre Taylor. So I can basically start this discussion as an overview. I was not here last month. I was on a business trip to New York, but I was listening to the meeting over the telephone. So just to sort of recap of where we've been as a commission, we adopted Blum's model. We decided on social determinants of health. We created working groups to basically work in each of these areas, and now we're moving forward. So, if Commissioner Hisserich would like to start the discussion, so it was your motion.
Well, I just we're 6 months I guess into this. Have any of the working groups actually met?
No, I'd like to start that this month. I mean, we wanted to make sure that there was staff, and particularly to have researchers on the line when we met, so that people could follow up and actually document what was going on, so that we just weren't meeting sort of in our own little bubble and then having nothing happening. Right. So that should be in place this month.
I think that was fundamentally the issue, and I think you indicated that you might have some lead on some resources. Is that accurate?
Yes. So we have an organization that will provide research and writing staff for us, and they've secured a grant for that. So it'll be at no cost to the city of Los Angeles or to our commission, and it won't drain our trust fund, which I think is great. And so we'll be moving forward with that in the next couple weeks.
Are you at liberty to say who it is?
I don't know if I'm at liberty to say at this point. Are we?
It's okay.
Is it? Okay. Okay, well, you can.
Well, I think, Susie reached out to me, and so we're going to be utilizing the resources of the Institute for Community Health and Wellbeing at Cal State Northridge. We will have a PhD sociologist working on helping to gather the data and then help the commission with preparing its report.
And I think it's important to, I'm glad that we're recording, obviously, our meetings for the commission, so that that person or group of people who are working on this can actually listen to what's happened so far in terms of the experts that have come and spoken to us and some of the issue areas. The individual working groups, though, I think should actually make the decision in terms of, in their particular category or area, what specific things they would like to see in the report. And then we can utilize that staff for research, to document those meetings, to make sure that the report is moving in the direction that the individual working groups are focused on. So that's sort of the overall plan.
Question. So I'm just trying to figure out, just walk me through that process. Just because, first of all, thank you so much for having the university step in. I mean, and I'm very happy, just transparency reasons, we need to know who our benefactors are. I mean, this is a public document. So thank you for that. But if you have staff that's going to work on the report, you have subcommittees, but how does that, you've got 15 individuals and several subcommittees and one group of staff. So how does that work? Like, how does that, how do you envision that happening? And considering we have 6 months to deliver that, so I'm just trying to get a better handle on how we're going to deliver.
Well, I think once we start meeting and once the staff has the opportunity to sort of catch up on some of the experts that have come and spoken to us, I think one of the things that we had discussed was just having someone writing the report and creating multiple numbers of drafts, which we'll have to look at, and that will be a public document and obviously a public meeting that will have to go over that report to basically have a consistent voice throughout. So it's important for like 1 or 2 people to be sort of writing those drafts to make sure that there's a consistent voice, and then coming back to the commission and providing us with just multiple drafts that we can mark up and change as we go along. And I think it's important. I mean, we've had 6 months now of people testifying, of us hearing from various communities, and I would like to see the commission moving more toward something that we did today, which is hearing a lot from the community as opposed to department heads. I think we've heard from a lot of department heads, which is great, so that we know sort of where the county is. But I think when we bring the community in and community partners who are working on these issues, sometimes we can go a little more in depth in terms of identifying some of the sort of loopholes. So I think as we move forward, the staff would, what we talked about actually with Cal State Northridge, was that the staff would actually monitor phone calls with the working groups, will document the conversation, and then we'll work with those working groups to make sure that each of those, that the focus is what comes out of those working groups. And so it's really up to us as a commission to sort of create that narrative. I'd love to see actually a narrative piece, because I think a lot of the reports that have come out from the city and the county miss the sort of narrative of what's going on in these communities. And it's fine to be data driven, and it's great to have all of that information in a report. But sometimes when you get the narrative too from the community or from community members who are impacted by a lot of these sort of health disparities that we've been talking about in these communities, you get a different story. And I think if we can do one thing from this report, I would love to see the council actually taking action. And in a lot of times, I think narratives are so powerful that they actually lead to action more than sort of a data-driven report.
I think it just definitely has to have, it has to be symbiotic. You have to have the data and you have to have the narrative as well.
Exactly.
So I just wanted to make sure that because it is 6 months, and we weren't privy to the conversation with Northridge, I'm just trying to get a handle, and it would be good for the rest of the committee to actually have that dialogue with the university, just so we can all be on the same page and understand who the POC is, how do we move forward on that whole process.
Yeah, and as soon as there's an MOU, I'm sure that they'll come, probably Dave or someone from Cal State Northridge can come, and then we can have a conversation with that person when they come to speak to the commission.
So the other issue that I had is I know that we were tasked to do several things, and one of the issues that was raised was making sure, which I think we're in violation of, making sure that there's a commissioner at every county meeting. And so I'm just trying to make sure if we can get a guideline of everything that we were tasked to do, so make sure in addition to the report and making sure that we're meeting those expectations, and if not, let's consider, how do we address that?
Okay, I think that one of the things that I'd asked, because I know that was an agenda item in the beginning of our commission meetings, so one of the things that I did ask was that if anything sort of pertinent to our commission had come up in these meetings, with the assumption that people were attending them, that they let me know and we can put that on the agenda. If people are not attending, then that's another situation. And I guess we can create some sort of report back, which could go, I guess, to the clerk, so that people can sort of document if they're actually attending these meetings. I mean, we obviously can't, we can ask politely, we can't force commissioners to actually attend meetings that they signed up to attend. But I'm hoping that that's happening. I know that I attend many meetings, and sometimes things just don't come up that are pertinent to the city of LA or pertinent to our commission. So if they are, I mean, I'm hoping that people will report back, and I'm happy to send out an email to remind people of that particular function that we're supposed to be sort of carrying out in terms of that mandate. But the question is, do we just agendize that at every single meeting? Because it seemed like we were doing that, and it wasn't really working out very well because people didn't, even though people were attending meetings and it was clear that they were, there just was not a report back from commissioners.
I think the issue that came up at the beginning was understanding whether or not it was realistic, and it was a situation where commissioners were discussing whether or not this is something that we could recommend back, that it's not possible to attend all of them. However, there's this percentage. I'm just trying to making sure that we set realistic expectations and we're able to deliver.
Yeah, I mean, to be completely honest, I would like to wait until we've at least had a year on the commission to sort of go back and assess that. I think reopening that question actually reopens the entire ordinance, which, I think at this point it would be better to just wait until November when we've had a year's worth of experience, that we can go back to the council and then outline any parts of the ordinance that didn't seem to work or that weren't reasonable. But, we're a new commission. We just started in November. I think everyone is still sort of getting a handle on what we're doing and how we're moving forward. And rather than reopen an ordinance sort of halfway through the process, if people agree, I would rather do an assessment at the end and actually, after we've had an opportunity to create a document, have our annual report, and then know for sure sort of, what works and what doesn't. But I think we're so new that opening that up, I wouldn't even know where to start in terms of what works and what doesn't.
Okay, so I'm sorry, it's like going backwards. Just two questions, just from my own clarification. One, is that a decision that's made by the commission as a whole? Or is that something that you specifically direct? And the second issue is, I personally would rather know now because my council member is holding me accountable to specific deliverables, and I want to make sure that I can say, yes, I did meet those deliverables, and we did that's the only reason why I want to do assessments, because ultimately, and I understand all the commissioners here have been entrusted to do so, to deliver for their members. So I just want to make sure we're all on the same board and same page, and will we ever decide as the commission what's realistic and being able to deliver is key. Just
yeah.
my 2 cents.
I think that, first of all, you can make a motion and bring that to a vote of the commission. Obviously, that's your right. I think that, though, looking at that, you'd have to have someone from the council actually make that motion and second it once it gets them. So that could be a recommendation from our commission. I don't necessarily agree with it, but you could certainly make that recommendation. But it's actually up to the council to agendize that, to reopen the ordinance, to reassess that. And the fact of the matter is, I don't know if that would even come up within the next 6 months. So that's something that, if the other commissioners feel that they want to bring that up and want the council to look at, is you're right. But I just don't see how that could be agendized in the next 6 months with the council.
May I? Commissioner Esparza, I think Commissioner Jaquez brings up some great points. I think that, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think you're saying, what is it realistic that we can do? Mm-hmm. Not the ordinance is asking us, but what is it that we can do?
Deliver,
I think we need clarity on that. And I think the other thing is, although we adopted Blum's model in terms of allowing us to organize our work groups, I think we also have to have a working plan for what will this report look like. And I think that has to be the commission deciding what those elements of the report are. So although I extended out the university's capabilities to do the report, we're going to need guidance. The university is going to need guidance on what this report is going to look like, how it's going to be formatted, what the data is that we can realistically collect, and make some recommendation determinations after that. So I think we need a little more discussion here in the commission about what these pieces must look like to satisfy our charter as a commission.
Yeah, and we did create an ad hoc committee to look at, and this is kind of how we came up with Blum's model and using the social determinants of health. But we did actually have originally a subcommittee to talk about the report and what it would contain. And I don't know. I mean, we may need to consult with the city attorney. I mean, this could be part of our main commission meeting, or there could be perhaps one person from each of our working groups be part of this sort of other committee that would just look at the writing of the report. I don't know if all the commissioners are interested in that. It's my only thing, so I would rather have people who are actually interested in talking about that, sort of working on that.
Commissioner Sharp, good evening. Couple thoughts on how we can meet our 5 assignments. The first of the 5 in the ordinance is to attend all county meetings. I think there's unanimity that for a group of professionals that's not possible to meet. Whether there's litigation or pressure on the city to hold the city accountable for us not meeting that is a question for the future. The assignments that are in addition to that have really good opportunities for each of us to play a useful role. This is my 3rd round on commission service and task force service with the city. And in each and every time we've structured the process so that there were specific functions that occurred at the commission meetings that took best advantage of the unique combination of people in the room together at this time. And so let me just, in the briefest form, sketch out what I think that means in this context. Assignment number 2, review contracts. That is a very clear function. It's written very clearly in the ordinance what's supposed to be done. There needs to be a written request to the county requesting copies of some contracts. A subgroup of commissioners needs to look at the contracts, present a recommendation back to the group as to whether they are best meeting the needs of residents. Then the group can discuss that. That would be a good action to take as a full group. Additionally, the city's agreement with the county, which I've attempted to get going on, is a method of similar analysis where a small subset of people get some information. In this case, Candy from the city clerk's office, I think, has raised her hand. Is that your hand up there, Sandy? Going to collect some information from city departments regarding the agreement with the county and the city. A summary of that comes back and plays into discussion here so there can be a decision made. The other task that is more elaborate is this question of how to do 2 parts of the plan. One is assessing the health needs of residents. The second part of it, the way it's written in the ordinance, is to prescribe specific goals and objectives akin to a strategic plan. That's actually what I do for a living. I'm a strategic plan consultant, so I sit in these meetings all the time. And the way it's easiest done with a big group like this that gets together only once a month is if the analytical process that CSUN can deliver can update relevant documents that we can look at in a comparison form with recent data. So there's been a city plan for Healthy LA we heard a presentation on. There's 3 county strategic plans, 2 of which we've heard presentations on. Those can be simply formatted in a table that reflects where there are indicators of alignment, where there aren't. And as our friend from AHF pointed out, there's no STI indicator in the city's plan, I think was one of your observations last month. And that's the type of discussion we can have at this group level so that the work of the CSUN team is informing this room to make the decisions and provide them direction as to the writing. That's how it's been done in the previous rounds I've been part of, and I think that's the easiest way to take advantage of this expertise here, which we can really only get together once a month. So that would be my suggestion, is that the planning process begin with presenting to us what are the decisions that others have made in this area, so we can at least not start with a blank slate and layer on narrative and or human experience and or presentations we've received here. But the template or the framework for it is actually already in 4 or 5 different places. And I think that's the easiest way for us to take advantage of this space, is to discuss those differences and vote on or discard what are these various indicators. Some have traffic death reduction, some have gun violence reduction, some have smoking reduction. There's all these different aspects of health. We need to prioritize what we think is most important for the city to adopt as part of its strategic plan out of this commission.
Okay, any other comments?
Well, I do. Just Commissioner Ariola, because I I did miss the first meeting, and I missed March, and I apologize again for that. But there were, it seemed to me at the commission meetings that I have been attending that originally the focus seemed to be to me that one of the priorities was to address the homeless population because of the mayor's initiative and the council's initiative, and especially now recently, all of the homeless articles in the press. So I hope we're not dropping that issue. Just a comment.
Yeah, we have a working group actually on homelessness, so that will be one of the ones that meets this month.
What are the working groups then?
You know what, I didn't bring the list with me, but I do have the list.
Well, maybe
and everyone who has signed up for each one.
Oh.
Yeah, I thought it would be much quicker actually to get staff on board, and it just took longer than expected.
Okay, I understand.
I just
It's in our past minutes. You can just go back to your past minutes.
Yeah. Actually, I have the document that I can send out to everyone.
Yeah.
Commissioner Andrews Taylor, I just want to go back to what Commissioner Sharp was saying in terms of looking at what's already there, getting some guidance or adding, to those charts and saying this is what's here from the county level, from the city level, from the presentations that we've heard. Let's lay it all out, and then we can start to prioritize and generate those reports. And it's actually 2 reports. We're supposed to be prepare and present a report twice yearly. So we're about halfway mark. So something should be coming up pretty soon. At least I think we should have a target for something, even a preliminary report, to come out relatively soon. Not the final. And then to go back for a moment to the attend all meetings. That was one of those things that got me from the very beginning because it's not realistic. And I think it would be worth having the City Council revisit that piece of this ordinance rather than waiting till the end of our term and then going and saying, you know what, we didn't make it to all the meetings. We know that now. I think we know that now, that we're not able to make it to all of the meetings. That would be a full-time job for several people.
Looking at past documents and reports is actually something that we talked about with Cal State Northridge, so that was sort of already on the docket. In terms of sort of reopening, so my understanding is that when we ask them to reopen a piece of the ordinance, it actually doesn't work that way. The entire ordinance, is my understanding, would be opened up and could change sort of midstream in terms of what we're moving forward on right now. But that actually was a negotiation between AIDS Healthcare Foundation and the City Council in terms of what they came up with. And so again, if there's a motion that comes out of the Health Commission, we can relay that to the City Council. I'm not necessarily in support of that because we're midstream, and I think reopening this could actually potentially change the direction of the Commission as well, in terms of them trying to prioritize specific issues over others that we may not agree with, because right now we're fairly independent. But, if that's the will of this commission, then we can obviously relay that to the City Council, and I'm not sure it would be agendized within the next 6 months. Any other questions or comments?
I think I want to make a motion that we push it forward to the City Council.
I second.
Can you say the word, can you put another word instead of it?
Can you please state what the motion is?
Sorry.
Thanks.
I move that we have the City Council revisit some of the provisions in the ordinance, such as the provision to attend all meetings.
County meetings.
All, it says all. It says all county, and it says one or more. I'm going to read the actual language here. Cause one or more commissioners, that's us, to attend all meetings, hearings, working sessions, and other events held or conducted by any and all government bodies, agencies, or entities of the County of Los Angeles.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. I just wanted to go back to the agenda item because I think that the motion that you're making now is not necessarily related to the item number 2. So item number 2 really talks about the kinds of assistance that the commission needs to complete its work, but doesn't talk about looking at the overall ordinance or recommendations with respect to modifications or revisions to the ordinance. And just to point of clarification, that you can amend an ordinance and you can amend only one provision of it without touching the rest of it.
Oh, good. Okay, well, we can agendize this for next month if you'd like to do that. Okay, and then it will be on there, and then we'll have a public disclosure of what's coming up so people can comment on it. Okay, great. Anything else on this section for number 2?
Just to clarify, so the agreement with Cal State Northridge to provide some staffing is essentially a given, which is fine. That answers this issue. Is that right? Is that where we leave it? We don't have to do anything else, in other words, to make that happen?
No, and we can agendize someone from Cal State Northridge to come for next month's meeting so that we can begin the process.
Yeah, this is Commissioner Hawkins. I just want to focus also if we can be privy to the MOU as well, just so we're all on the same page. Thank you.
Great. Okay, moving on to, there were no comment cards for this particular section. Item number 3, discussion and possible action to address the vacancy created by the death of Commissioner Bill Rosendahl, commission members' non-attendance, and filling the second vice president vacancy pursuant to motions Jaquez, Hezrich, and Jaquez Mendel.
Commissioner Hawkins, actually.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. Just wanted to focus that what I mentioned at the top of the meeting is that item 3 was not specifically mirrored what was discussed and approved in the minutes. So I'm trying to figure out how did that work, or how do you address that issue? Only because it's my name on this motion, so I just want to make sure it's fairly, it's accurate to what the commission had approved.
Well, I think we should look back at the minutes.
Mm-hmm.
It's right here.
It's right there. So the minutes says, it related to placing on the next commission agenda discussions and possible actions to address current vacancies and leadership roles and the opportunities of the City Health Commission. And the agenda item states, discussion and possible action to address vacancy created by the death of Commissioner Bill Rosendahl, commissioner members' non-attendance, and filling the second vice presidency vacancy.
Probably should have gone on this way with this language. Two separate topics.
Oh, I think it's an amalgamation of the next motion as well, too.
I think the next one does address the leadership slots issue. Sort of split it into 2 pieces, I think.
Right, it was amended.
Okay, I'm waiting for the city clerk and the city attorney to confer.
Okay, I'm sorry. I just want to make sure the city clerk is showing me some language that I don't know where this came from. Okay, so in looking at this language, it appears that there might have been 2 topics in here related, but one of them had to do with filling vacancies and the other had to do with leadership role and opportunities of the City Health Commission, which seems to be a little bit broader than what ultimately found its way onto the agenda. Is
Correct.
that your concern?
Correct.
So I think maybe this could have been done by way of 2 agenda items. Because although the topics are related, they seem to cover sort of different aspects of it. But for purposes of today's meeting, we're limited to what is actually on the agenda, which talks about filling the vacancy created by Commissioner Rosendahl's passing. And then for your next meeting, if you wanted to discuss the leadership roles and opportunities. I think you could put that on. If you think that they are related and you would prefer to have talked about the leadership roles before voting, then you may want to go ahead and defer this item until your next meeting. So it's up to you.
Yeah, because originally Commissioner Mandel had his original motion actually mirrored more of this point that was not adopted. And so then I went and came out and introduced the second, which was slightly altered. I mean, I'm just trying to figure out, just for transparency issues and understanding, when something is approved by the entire commission, it should reflect specifically what the commission approved.
Yeah, I don't think there's any disagreement with that.
Okay.
And so I guess if in fact in discussing leadership roles, you're talking about the qualities of the person you would like to have step up to the position, I think you can do that. If by leadership role you meant some other kind of discussion and opportunities, you meant another type of discussion, then you want to put that off. But if in looking at who you would like to recommend fill that vacancy, part of that discussion deals with who you think, what the qualities would be in a leader, I think you can do that tonight. So I think it just depends on where you were planning to go and how wide-ranging the discussion was.
I have a question. Did Commissioner Rosendahl represent a particular council district?
Yes, he did. So I've had discussions with Mike Bonin, Councilmember Mike Bonin, who appointed Bill Rosendahl, and he's planning to appoint in his district, which I think is District 11, shortly. And I also had a conversation with Bob Blumenfield, whose appointee has not sort of physically shown up for a commission meeting, and they're addressing this issue with the commissioner. And the other council district, I believe, who hasn't had a commissioner show up is Nuri Martinez's commissioner and commission appointee, and I've not been in contact with them yet.
And that was actually the spirit behind it. One of them was to do a reassessment of folks who actually haven't been showing up in the vacancies, and we also wanted to get those council members weigh in as well, if they were going to reappoint somebody or trying to figure out how they were going to be part of this commission. And so that was part of the discussion.
Oh, good. Okay, well, we've heard back from two of them. So I just need to make contact with Nuri Martinez's office. I planned to do that today, but didn't have sufficient time. We also asked the city attorney's office to come. Noreen Vincent is here to explain sort of the succession from the death of Bill Rosendahl. So she was going to say a few words.
I do have a copy of Robert's Rules, which I understand this commission adopted. And in Robert's Rules, it does talk about, in the case of the resignation or death of the president, the vice president, if there's only one, or the first vice president, if there are more than one, automatically becomes president for the unexpired term, unless the bylaws expressly provide otherwise for filling a vacancy in the office of president. And to my knowledge, you haven't provided anything otherwise in your bylaws.
Correct. You're correct.
Okay.
Right. But that's still, Commissioner Mandel, it just still means that we have now a second vice president spot that is open.
That's correct, you do.
Which we can address today.
You can, because it's on your agenda.
Correct.
Great. Okay, so are we comfortable moving forward then with a motion to nominate one or more people for second vice president?
I just want to understand then, and I know Robert's rules pretty well. So the first vice president has become the president, and Mr. Sharp, who's the second vice president, becomes the first vice president.
That's correct.
Can we decide whether or not we want a second vice president?
Yes.
Is it even necessary? Unless somebody has a burning desire to be second vice president.
I'd like to hear from Commissioner Sharp. Shannon, how does that work, having that dynamic? Because you two would know how that
There
works.
currently are no roles and responsibilities. It is a unformed process. The other commissions, every single one is appointed by the mayor's office, and so the mechanism, based on recommendations from council, but the mechanism through which decision-making and processes is very clear. They're either overseeing a city department or reporting to the mayor's office about key city department functions. So this is a very unique animal. There is no precedent for different council offices to have persons appointed, and therefore there's no sort of hierarchical process for how decisions are made without the mayor's office as the anchor. There's a long roundabout way of answering your question of it needs some clarification. In the neighborhood council world, there's a specific paragraph describing which are the roles and responsibilities for each of the officer slots. That doesn't exist here because, again, in all the other commissions, it's in effect of service to the mayor's agenda and or department oversight functions that are spelled out in the city charter.
Commissioner, I'm sorry. Did you want to speak?
I'm sorry. I was just going to say that you would have the ability to determine, you could adopt bylaws that would set forth what it is you envision in terms of how this commission operates.
Right, but in response, just narrowly in response to Commissioner Haka's question, there is no specific role.
That is.
And there's no functions or responsibilities to date that I have been able to perform of any use other than in the previous meeting I had the opportunity to chair as Commissioner Shannon was in New York City, and that's been it.
Commissioner Mandel.
That would be the only reason to have a second vice president, really, is that if both of you were tied up, that we would have already had somebody selected to be chairing that meeting of that one event. Other than that, there's really not. We can always elect it. Are we allowed legally to pick somebody to chair the meeting if both our first vice president and our president were unable to attend?
There would be a process for you to select someone to chair the meeting in the absence of the president or first vice president.
I think for the this is Jimenez speaking. In the interest of time, I would like to move that the first vice president become president, the second vice president become vice president, and we have no second vice president.
Second.
The city attorney's office, Noreen Vincent. It's there because the succession happened automatically. I don't think we need a vote on moving folks up, if that's my understanding. But then the motion would just be not to have a second vice president.
Well, he's just
Is that correct?
He's just codifying what Robert Rules says.
The discussion in the last meeting was to specifically have this. That was the two motions that were passed. That were specifically requesting the discussion about these roles and to make these selections. So it is not prescribed by Robert's rules. It was discussed and encouraged by or adopted by the majority of commissioners to be discussed at this meeting and acted on, I think was the recommendation.
Okay.
And can I
Noreen Vincent, please.
Can I clarify?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, when you said that the committee or the commission could still adopt bylaws, is that what I...
Yes.
I just want a point of clarification that the commission could still decide on leadership or bylaws or however. And what happens when the president and vice president may disagree on something, for example? Am I...
That's what I was raising earlier about how in every other process that the city has, it's explicitly clear what the roles are of the different officers. This is a unique, unique creation that has no defined roles in the city charter nor in the practical apparatus of the city leadership, which is led by the mayor's office.
Well, I think you have adopted Robert's rules for purposes of how this commission is going to operate. So with respect to the appointment and the succession in the situation that we have here where, unfortunately, Mr. Rosendahl, Commissioner Rosendahl passed away, the Roberts rules provide for the automatic succession of the vice president, or in this instance, a first vice president, to move up to the president's office for the until the expiration of the term. And since you had a second vice president, that individual moves up to be the first vice president. There's nothing in Roberts rules, and there's nothing in your ordinance that requires you to have a second vice president. So you can proceed. You because it occurs by automatic succession, it happens whether the body votes or not, but I don't think there's any harm in the body just confirming what has transpired automatically, unless...
So there's a motion.
Okay. So there's a motion and a second. Okay, so motion and second to, I guess, reconfirm through Robert's Rules of Order that the vice president becomes the president, the second vice president becomes the first vice president, and that we not have a second vice president position or role. Okay, any more discussion? Great. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Please say aye. Aye. All opposed?
Opposed.
Opposed?
Opposed.
Okay, 2, 3 opposed. Okay, the ayes have it. That motion passes. Okay, moving on to public comment for item number 3. General Jeff. No?
I'm sorry, can we just ask for a point of clarification? Because the motion really confirmed the president and first vice president position. There was a second part of the motion, really, which had to do with eliminating the position of the second vice president. So I think in trying to capture this, you have 2 voted no. Was it with respect to the entire motion? Was it with respect to, or I'm not quite sure, because I don't know that you can...
Well, that's why I was asking the question to begin with before we took up the motion, because there were 2 parts.
Okay, so yeah, if we can just clarify, and I guess maybe I'm going to reconsider. I think that there isn't the ability, based on Robert's rules, to vote no for the vice president moving up, et cetera. There is the ability to decide whether you want to have a second vice president. So if it's really
two separate motions.
Yeah, and correct.
And that's what I was getting on as far as my opposition was about the second vice position.
Okay, so yeah, so
And that the roles haven't been clarified.
Wouldn't mind doing the motion again so we can have the clarity? Or
Okay, do we need the first motion
You
if
really
it
don't
happens
need it.
automatically? Okay, so
You
that's
really
what I
don't
was
need-
saying
you really
earlier.
need the
So
second motion.
Okay, so the motion, okay,
So
so...
the motion
if-
is to eliminate the second
officially-
vice president.
Yes.
Great.
Second.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded to eliminate the second vice president.
Should we have a discussion about that?
I think so.
Let's have a discussion, yes.
Is there a strong feeling that we need a second vice president?
I think actually the last commission meeting we had talked about, now that we're in 6 months in and folks actually have an opportunity to see what the commission is about and how they can proceed, I know that there were several commissioners who put themselves up at the beginning to serve in a leadership role, and I just wanted to encourage that opportunity as well to the individuals to see if it's something that they want to step up and versus just taking it outright. I think it would be good to offer that opportunity for the commissioners who would be interested in serving.
Okay. Any other discussion? I'm always happy to have people in leadership roles, which is why I'm glad we're sort of bifurcating this motion. I think that in the beginning of the commission, in November, when we had the election, it was either November or December, having 3 of us, I thought worked fairly well. It was Bill Rosendahl and myself and Matt. I thought it was fairly collaborative. We met and discussed a lot of things that were coming up. And, I have to agree with Jaquez, that Commissioner Jaquez, that it's Jaquez, I'm sorry, that it's a great opportunity, I think, for people who want to be in leadership and begin to move up.
I remember in the past, Commissioner Vick and also completely, your name escaped me, Commissioner, several of you had discussed the opportunity and having the background that you do in county health, and to me, I just felt that it would be a great benefit. That's done.
Okay, so the motion on the table is to eliminate the second vice president. I think we should raise our hands, actually, because this will make it easier for me to do a count. And it's just on a simple majority,
I'm
my
sorry,
understanding.
I'm sorry, you have a public comment on this item? Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. I thought I saw you.
Yeah,
sign the card.
he rescinded his card.
If you have a public comment.
Just public comment for item number.
Oh, different item.
6.
Okay. I'm sorry.
So if you could raise your hands if you are in favor of eliminating the second vice president position, and I'll do a count. 1, okay. All against? Okay, 9 against. Motion does not carry, and we have a second vice president position still. So is there a motion to nominate someone for second vice president?
I move to nominate Commissioner Vick.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to. Do you accept? I think I have to ask you that. Right. Okay, great. It's been moved and seconded to move Commissioner Vick to the second vice president. Are there any other nominations? I think I have to ask this 3 times. Any other nominations? Any other nominations? Okay, we will move forward to a vote. All in favor of Commissioner Vick as second vice president, please raise your hands.
Aye. Can we just aye?
Aye.
Great. Commissioner Vick, congratulations. You're second vice president for the Health Commission. Okay, moving on now to item 4, discussion of provider access throughout Los Angeles pursuant to motion. Mandel, Marquez. So I did reach out to LACMA to see if they could have someone come and speak to this issue, and I know that Dr. Curley actually touched on a little bit of this issue, but maybe not to the extent that you were hoping. So they actually couldn't find anyone who could come for tonight, but we're looking for someone for next month, so if we could get a motion to continue this.
Please, I'll make a motion to continue, please.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor of continuing item 4 to a date certain? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so the motion was by Commissioner Mandel, and the second was Commissioner Jimenez. Great. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, moving on to item number 5, items for future discussion.
I think I'd like to have us revisit some of our responsibilities and whether or not we can fulfill those roles.
Okay, so discussion and action on revisiting responsibilities and roles. And is this pertaining to the ordinance that you had brought up earlier,
yes,
specifically?
Yes.
Okay, so we're revisiting responsibilities and roles per the ordinance. Okay.
Thank you.
Any other requests for agendized items?
Well, not really agenda.
And you can also send them to me, obviously, through email if you think of something or something comes up in the community that you feel that we need to focus on.
I was thinking of what Commissioner Sharp was talking about, sort of in creating a strategic plan. Can we get that on the agenda, or how we can start to discuss sort of hashing out, logic model, whatever you want to call it. But I think we need to really, get a table with some boxes in it and start writing stuff down, timelines and things like that. So if we can get that on the agenda, that'd be great.
I actually borrowed it. So I'm not
Great.
sure where
Discussion of our annual plan. I was thinking, actually, given sort of the discussion today and the motion that passed out of the City Council on petroleum and natural gas, I would love to hear from people who were impacted in Porter Ranch in the Northridge area. Now, in order to do that, we would likely have to have our meeting. I mean, it wouldn't have to be there, but it would probably be in the best interest of the residents to have our meeting in the San Fernando Valley. Is this something that people are open to in terms of hearing from this particular community, since the report back from the City Council is in 6 months? Not for our annual report I'm talking about, but the report back on petroleum and natural gas and the health impacts related to that. Is the Commission open to meeting in the San Fernando Valley and taking on this issue?
I'm more interested in hearing from the more vulnerable populations rather than Porter Ranch, to be honest with you.
Porter Ranch has received a lot of coverage, where some of the other communities haven't received that same level of attention.
We've had 2 detailed presentations on the adverse impacts of oil extraction So my recommendation would be that we formulate and adopt a particular policy plank on it in order to meet a timeline that perhaps is accelerated relative to the overall report. And I would be happy to follow up with the previous presenter who'd recommended specifically that we adopt a support for their request, which is pending in City Council, for a 1,500-foot buffer for schools, daycare, and residences. That's a possible action we could take next month that would contribute to the City Council process, given that we've had 2 rounds of input on this subject. I'd love us to take an action.
I agree. I think we've had 2 rounds of discussion on this, but it's been related specifically to petroleum and not to natural gas. And part of the request from the City Council was to actually look at the pipelines themselves, to look at leaks, to look at corrosion, to look at where they're situated, to look at maintenance. And the pipelines are different for natural gas as opposed to petroleum. So I'm concerned that our recommendations would only focus at this point on petroleum and not on natural gas. And I'm pretty sure the natural gas pipeline extends into several communities. So I'm just concerned that if we're not hearing from residents and not hearing on those impacts, we won't be able to report back on them in 6 months. Any other thoughts or discussion? Okay, are people open to working on natural gas issues?
If the council's
or to
requested
have
it, I
this-
think we ought to be responsive. I mean, I agree with your instinct to be responsive to the City Council. So certainly if that's a request pending in front of us, we ought to try and act on it forthwith. The only question is, can we be prepared to take some action to inform it if there's a timeline that's in advance of when our final report is due?
Yeah, and I think similar to what we've done on homeless issues and adopting the healthcare model for Housing for Health, we can certainly, leading up to the 6-month report, at least pass out some resolutions, certainly on the 1,500-foot buffer and some other issues that we've been dealing with. And those can sort of trickle out before the final report comes out in 6 months. But I do think we should be hearing from communities that are impacted, I think regardless of where they are.
If I may, all due respect, but I don't really need to hear a lot of the folks in Porter Ranch that are victimized by the problem. I mean, I know it's a problem. I'd like to hear more scientific presentations about the substance of this. In other words, what physical, actual medical health harm occurs as a result of these things, because we've heard some modest, almost disagreement here about its impacts, or at least what the dangers are. So wherever that's held, that's what I'd like to hear more than to hear the folks talk. I'm sorry for them, but I've heard that a lot.
Yes, I agree with what John just said, that I'd rather hear about the scientific data rather than individuals' complaints about their own health issues. It's just anecdotal.
And I'm not sure we need to go to the valley to do that, although I'm willing to do it if that's the case. But, that could be done several places, I assume.
Would people be open having another meeting in the community for next month? Sure. I'm fairly happy with the attendance today, and we can see that as we move into the community comes out to talk to us, and I think
for a variety of reasons.
Fantastic.
I think it changes the dynamic of the meeting, and I'm all for having more community meetings.
Okay. Yes. Great. Okay, we can talk about this, I guess, through email if you have any suggestions in terms of where you would like to see the next meeting. We can move on with that. That's
Can I
fine
just
with the whole
ask
commission.
one other thing? You said you'd get out the lists of the subcommittees.
The working groups, yes.
Yeah,
they're not subcommittees, they're working groups.
Well, okay.
Apparently there is a distinction there, though, that we have to make.
Okay.
I've been told by the city attorney's office.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, so you're going to get that out to us. I'm just wondering if that should be made public at some point, just so people know who's doing what.
Yes, we can make that public for the next meeting. Yes, since we'll be ready to start discussing the annual report. Okay, anything else on item 5, I'm sorry. Okay, item number 6 then is public comment. We have Dr. Tom. Oh, I don't think I have a card for you.
Oh, we'll let her fill one out.
She filled one.
She turned it
Yes.
in?
You did? Oh, I'm sorry. This is probably right here. I think I was handed these while I was speaking. Okay, so you're Claudia Spears.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I just rise as a longtime member of Holman United Methodist Church, and also on behalf of our senior pastor, Reverend Kelvin Sauls, and to thank you for conducting this meeting here at Holman. And just in view of your last comment, I'm sure you would be welcome here at any time.
Great.
Well, thank you for having us.
I personally am the co-chair of our Health and Wellness Committee here at Holman, and we're a very active committee under the direction of Reverend Sauls to be involved in community health, not only for our congregation, but for our community as well. And I also am co-chair of our HIV/AIDS ministry here at Holman called HOPE. And our ministry is about 15 years old, and we regularly provide health education around HIV/AIDS here and testing approximately 4 times per year. So I learned a lot being here tonight, and I thank you, and again, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And thank you to Holman and Pastor Sauls. Adam Cohen.
Hello, my name is Adam Cohen. I'm a public health consultant for AIDS Healthcare Foundation. You actually answered all the questions I was going to have, but I do want to say that I'm very happy that the reports are moving forward, and I'm also just very happy with the discussions that were taking place with the issues of oil and natural gas, because I was completely unfamiliar with that issue. So I learned something today, too.
And thank you for
so
your
much.
technical assistance.
Thank you. And General Jeff.
Good evening, General Jeff from Skid Row again, and I apologize. This actually should have been brought up during the previous item, but many of you are aware, but recently in Skid Row, there was a significant amount of overdoses from spice, legally known as synthetic marijuana. And so in following up and speaking to community members and speaking to law enforcement officers, there seems to not be a lot of legislation on that, and so officers were kind of in a quagmire in terms of enforcement. And so I think it would be a wonderful agenda item with some specific, some wonderful scientific presentations, hopefully, that could come before this commission, so that there could be some type of motions forwarded to the council, so that we can create some type of legislation and we can save lives. The last number I heard, there were as many as 15 people that OD'd in one weekend.
Oh.
And I there was personally myself when I saw 2 people laid out on one side of the street, and then right across the street, 4 people, 6 people at the same time. Something's got to be done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that concludes our meeting. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Great. All in favor?